We've gathered the details of your case. You've been missing for 5 years, but your husband applied for your death certificate and had you declared deceased 2 years ago. The officer said, we've contacted him for you, but you need to prepare yourself. He's remarried. At the police station, Courtney sat stiffly in the chair, listening to the police officer's words, her surroundings feeling strangely unfamiliar. 5 years ago, she had joined a medical relief team heading to Zomlonia. During an accident, she and her team were kidnapped by terrorists. It was only recently that peacekeeping forces rescued them, allowing her to return home. 5 years. For 5 long years, she had clung to the memory of her husband, Austin. Their love had sustained her through the horrors. They had been together for 5 years before marrying right after college. They were each other's whole youth. Courtney had imagined countless reunion scenarios, joyful tears, a heartfelt embrace, the bliss of being reunited. But never had she expected to hear that he's remarried. And the sunlight was gentle and warm. Courtney sat numbly by the outside. Hennesburg was in the midst of spring. The leaves rustled softly, and window, reaching out as if to grasp a fragment of that warmth. 5 years in the desert had left her almost entirely disconnected from the world. The trauma of war and the constant stress had rendered her mute the day she was rescued. She cried freely, and without restraint for the first time in 5 years. She thought that as long as she could see Austin again, her shattered soul would find comfort and healing. But reality had dealt her a cruel blow. Austin had applied for her death certificate in her 3rd year of disappearance. Not long after, he remarried. The door to the station opened abruptly. Austin rushed in, his expression anxious. He hadn't changed much in 5 years, perhaps a little more mature and composed. Dressed in a tailored suit that screamed affluence, he exhaled confidence. The watch on his wrist alone was worth a fortune. Clearly, life had been kind to him in her absence. Courtney, his gaze swept the room before landing on her in the Comer. His eyes reddened instantly. Courtney opened her mouth, but no words came out. If the officer hadn't told her about his remarriage and his child, she might have believed that Austin still cared for her. You've been through so much, he said, walking up to her and holding back the urge to embrace her. Come home with me. Courtney froze, unmoving in her seat. She wasn't sure if she still had a home to return to. Courtney, don't be afraid. It's all over now. You're back. Austin said gently, crouching in front of her, trying to reassure her. Her eyes reddened as she stared at him, wondering if the officer had been mistaken. She couldn't believe that the Austin who had once loved her so deeply could have remarried. Back then, Austin had climbed a mountain in the dead of night just to hang a love lock at the summit for her. She refused to believe that all his affection had been a lie. The situation has been explained to you, Mr. Gilbert. After the traumatic events, she developed aphasia. The officer handling Courtney's case approached, speaking in a low voice. A flicker of pain flashed in Austin's eyes. He instinctively took Courtney's hand. She obediently followed him, step by step, out of the police station. She had thought that leaving hell behind would mean stepping into heaven. But reality made her tremble uncontrollably. Courtney, I'll take you to a hotel for now. A lot has changed over the years, and the situation at home is. Austin hesitated, clearly reluctant to bring her back to his house, fearing it would upset her. Courtney swiftly pulled out a notepad and pen, scribbling furiously. Take me home. She meant their marital home, the testament to their 5 years of love. It was where all her happiest memories had begun. Austin froze, his silence stretching unbearably. After what felt like an eternity, he finally spoke. Courtney, I'm sorry. Courtney was trembling, her hands clutching tightly in fear. She had never been this terrified, even on the battlefield, with bullets whizzing past her. But then he said the words she feared most. Courtney, you've been missing for 5 years. Everyone thought you were dead. So I remarried. My wife and daughter live there now. I'm sorry, but can't let them get hurt. In that moment, Courtney L. felt her heart, pounding fiercely just seconds before, shatter into pieces. Send gift. That's my home. Courtney was losing control. She struggled to hold back her emotions, using sign language to tell Austin that it was her home. Austin didn't understand sign language. Despite their physical closeness, an invisible chasm of unfamiliarity and distance stretched between them. Courtney gradually fell silent, swallowing her pain in solitude. Over the past 5 years, she had learned how to endure. Tears slipped from her eyes, splashing onto the back of her trembling hand. With unsteady fingers, she gripped a pen and scribbled messily on a piece of paper. I just want to go home and get some things. Austin seemed to want to say something, but when he saw her tears, he only opened his mouth and then closed it again. Finally, he nodded. All right. The drive was quiet. Oh, quiet. Courtney sat silently, staring out the window. Once, she had believed the passenger seat of Austin's car would always belong to her. But now, the dashboard was adorned with cartoon stickers and trinkets from his current wife. The man who had said, "I love you" to her word by word and promised to never let her down had become someone else's husband by her third year of absence. Compared to the endless desert in Zomlonia, Hennesburg's dazzling nightlife felt overwhelming, a world almost too extravagant to comprehend. It had only been 5 years since she left, but it felt like the entire world had abandoned her. "Do my parents not want me anymore?" she finally wrote, unable to suppress her thoughts. There had been 6 people in the team kidnapped with Courtney. Her elderly mentor was taken in by her children. A senior colleague, who had been on the brink of divorce before the incident, was greeted at the airport by her husband. Upon their return, everyone had someone waiting for them. Everyone except Courtney. She had memorized every important phone number by heart, yet none of them worked when she called. When Austin didn't come to meet her, she had told herself he was likely caught up with emergencies at the hospital when her parents didn't come. She had convinced herself they were old and might not have seen the end news or received the notice. But reality was unbearably cruel. "Courtney, can we talk about your parents tomorrow?" Austin asked nervously, pulling into a parking spot and glancing at her anxiously. Courtney's heart sank. An ominous feeling took hold. She shook her head insistently, desperate to know what had happened to her parents. "Let's go upstairs first. My wife made dinner." Austin got out of the car quickly, avoiding her gaze as he opened the door for her. Some habits hadn't changed. As Courtney stepped out, Austin instinctively placed his hand over her head, shielding her from hitting it on the car frame. Once, she had thought that this kind of care and affection was hers alone. But it turned out that everything changes. Love didn't just fade, it moved on. "She's someone you know." Perhaps to prevent Courtney from becoming too emotional, Austin spoke again as they entered the elevator. "She's Mr. Lewis's daughter. She helped me a lot," he went on. "During the years you were missing. I lost my mind searching for you, and she was the one who pulled me out of that dark place and stayed by my side." Courtney lowered her head, her hands clenched into fists. Austin was talking about Vera Lewis, their junior from university, who had openly pursued Austin back then. She even had publicly challenged Courtney with brazen words. "I don't care if he has a girlfriend. As long as he's not married, he'll be mine someday." At the time, Courtney had brushed her off, too confident in Austin's love for her. She had believed in him wholeheartedly, but in the end, the one who lost was here. The elevator stopped at the 19th floor, but Courtney didn't step out immediately. They had chosen this apartment as their marital home because Courtney loved high floors, and the 19th floor had a stunning view of the river running through Hennesburg. Because of the river view, this apartment had been significantly more expensive than other units. Courtney, worried about putting pressure on Austin's family, had convinced her parents to contribute an additional $80,000. This was their home, their shared space after marriage. And now, another woman lived here. Austin entered the code and the door clicked open. Courtney stared at him. After 5 years, he hadn't even changed the password. The irony was sharp. It was her birthday. "Daddy." Before Courtney could react, a lean girl ran out from inside and flung herself into Austin's arms. Austin shot Courtney a nervous glance before turning to Vera, who had appeared at the doorway. His tone was filled with frustration. "I told you to take her to your parents' place." Vera said nothing, her gaze fixed on Courtney. Courtney, however, couldn't take her eyes off the girl. Austin had remarried 3 years after her disappearance. But this child didn't look like she was 1 or 2 years old. She seemed closer to 4 or 5. Courtney's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with anger as she locked onto Austin. She demanded an explanation. "Sin guit. Tii explain for Austin," Vera said, breaking the silence. Courtney's body trembled as she raised her hands, gesturing with sharp, angry movements. Even her sign language seemed to radiate fury. "I don't need you to explain. I want him to explain." Vera couldn't understand sign language either, but the look in her eyes, as she gazed at Courtney, was filled with tears. Welled up in Courtney's eyes. That look of pity, from both Austin and Vera, felt like a dagger stabbing into her chest. At that moment, Courtney found herself wishing she had died in Zomlonia. If she had perished there, she wouldn't have to endure this torment now. Her trembling fingers dropped and she stopped resisting. When she'd been captured by terrorists, the physical pain wasn't enough to break her. But the psychological assault felt like hell itself. When Mr. Anderson accepted the mission to support medical aid in Zomlonia, "Austin didn't want you to go," Vera said. "You two had just gotten married, and all he cared about was you. He didn't want you to risk your life. But you, with your so-called dreams, your so-called pursuit of peace, and your personal heroism, insisted on going." Vera's tone tinged with accusation. "Vera." Austin raised a hand to his forehead, his voice low, urging her to stop. But Vera pressed on, her eyes reddening. "But you just signed up and left without hesitation. Did you ever think about Austin? When news of your team's crisis reached home, he lost it. He drank himself into oblivion every day, searching for you. Courtney's trembling fingers clenched as she looked at Austin. Back when she'd accepted her mentor Robert Anderson's peacekeeping mission, Austin had supported her. He had said, "Count Courtney. I'll support every decision you make. I'll wait for you to come back." Those words had been her anchor, the hope that kept her alive through everything she endured. "I'll admit it," Vera went on. "The way I got Austin wasn't exactly honorable, but I don't regret it. I love him. I have his child. I don't care if he still loves you because I know that one day, he'll love me." She stood tall, the posture of a victor. "I insisted on giving birth to his child. I stayed by his side during his darkest days. I'm the one who comforted him, who moved him, and that's why he agreed to be with me to give our child a complete family." Vera picked up her daughter, showing her off like a trophy. "How old are you?" Courtney wrote on a piece of paper, directing her question to the little girl. "5, the girl replied, her voice clear and confident. Courtney stared at her with numb eyes. The kid was 5 years old, which meant Austin had cheated on Courtney before she left for South Waydawn. In that moment, the so-called love Austin had promised her felt utterly worthless. "This is my home." Courtney held the pen tightly, writing the words on paper. "I know this house was bought by you and Austin together, but there's no choice, Courtney. You have to accept reality," said Vera. "I'll return the money you contributed to the house to you. But now, I'm Austin's wife. I hope you can understand and let us move on." She spoke directly, urging Courtney to take the initiative to dissolve her marriage with Austin. "We've packed all your belongings and moved them to the basement. If you need anything, you can find it there," Vera added before carrying her child and heading back to the room. Courtney stood at the doorway, feeling an overwhelming numbness that dulled her pain. Once, the living room had been filled with photos of her and Austin, snapshots of their youth and shared memories. Now, those photos were gone, replaced by pictures of Austin with Vera and their daughter, alongside scattered toys. Austin had always been a meticulous man, obsessed with cleanliness and order. Everything in their home used to be spotless. But now, the scattered toys and clothes showed that his aversion to mess wasn't absolute, it simply depended on the person creating it. Vera had said so much, and Austin hadn't refuted a single word. It was clear he was simply using Vera's words to express what he had long been thinking. "Come inside," Austin said softly, avoiding Courtney's eyes. "Take me back to Serene Cove." "Parents." Courtney didn't move. She looked down and wrote, "No, Austin. I want to go home. If you're free, could you?" Serene Cove was her parents' home. Courtney thought to herself that, though she had lost her husband, at least she still had her. Austin's hand froze mid-motion, gripping the doorframe tightly. His head hung low, and his eyes turned red. "Courtney, I'm sorry." Courtney felt entirely numb, staring blankly at Austin, unsure of what was happening. She didn't understand why the police seemed hesitant to say something, or why Austin hesitated to tell her directly. "Your parents," Austin began, his voice trembling. "They passed away the year after your incident." His head remained down as tears fell to the. Courtney was stunned, her vision darkening as shock washed over her. At that moment, it felt as if she'd been struck by a bomb, the pain reverberating through her soul and tearing through every fiber of her being. "What happened?" Courtney's hands shook as she hurriedly scribbled the question. She couldn't believe it. Her parents were in excellent health, and she was their only child. They were both officials who had only a few years left until retirement. Austin remained silent for a long time before finally lifting his gaze to Courtney. "After your accident, they sought help from every connection they could find to rescue you," he said. "But they were scammed and lost all their savings. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop them. The day it happened, I was sent to Evermount on an assignment. Before leaving, I stopped by to see them. That evening, I got a call saying there was a fire at their house and they didn't make it," he continued. Austin didn't explicitly say it, but Courtney understood. Her parents, after being scammed of all their money trying to save her, had fallen into despair and taken their own lives. Her vision darkened, and an overwhelming calmness settled over her, a strange reaction to the crushing weight of sorrow. "Courtney!" Austin shouted as Courtney collapsed to the ground with a loud thud, slowly losing consciousness. Her parents' words echoed in her mind, one after another. "Courtney, come back early. Your dad's making steak for dinner tonight." On sleeping in separate rooms. "Courtney, can you help me talk to your mom? She's sulking again. We're too old for her to keep insisting on." "Courtney, sweetheart, live a good life." She didn't know how much time had passed before she suddenly woke up, gasping for air as her eyes darted around the room. This once familiar home now felt terrifyingly alien. Austin, perhaps worried about her, hadn't taken her to a hotel. Instead, he let her stay in the guest room. It was past midnight. From downstairs, she could hear Austin and Vera arguing. Years. It was Vera's voice. Why did you let her stay here? Do you still have feelings for her? Austin, I'm the one who's been with you all these years. Don't deny it, Austin. You still love her, don't you? She kept going on. You couldn't even be bothered to change the house password. Fine. Since you still love her, I'll leave. I'll take Phoebe and go back to my parents' house. She doesn't need to divorce you, I'll do it. Now that she's back, our marriage doesn't matter anyway. Vera's voice was loud, deliberately so, Courtney realized. 5 years ago, she had thought that once she returned to Hennesburg, the nightmare would end. She had believed that she still had her loving parents and Austin, who adored her. But everything had changed. Courtney got out of bed, the immense unfamiliarity of the house suffocating her, urging her to escape. She never imagined that one day, she and Austin would become strangers so distant it hurt. As she stepped out of the guest room, she ran into Vera, who was holding her kid and about to leave. Vera glared at her with unrestrained anger, her gaze filled with blame, as if accusing Courtney of not dying abroad. Why did you come back? We were fine as a family before you returned. Why couldn't you just stay gone? Why didn't you die out there? Vera was completely unhinged, shouting at Courtney in a fit of rage. Vera, perhaps overwhelmed by how harsh her words were, Austin lost control for a moment and struck Vera in front of their kid. Vera stared at Austin in disbelief before turning and walking out the door. You hit me, you actually hit me for her. The kid started crying, wailing loudly and uncontrollably. Austin's eyes were filled with a mix of pain, regret, and uncase. The commotion drew the attention of the neighbors, who came out to watch, some even pulling out their phones to record. Vera, what's going on? Why are you and Austin fighting? Back when Courtney and Austin had bought this house, it had been an off-plan property. They'd been full of anticipation, eagerly picking up the keys and renovating it together. From an empty shell to a warm home, every nail and screw had carried their love. But now, this neighborhood was unfamiliar. 5 years had passed, and these neighbors were strangers to Courtney. In their eyes, this house and the title of its rightful lady belonged to Vera. The suffocating feeling of seeing her entire life's work and happiness replaced was overwhelming for Courtney. Who's that woman? She's not a mistress, is she? One neighbor asked. Bad woman. Why did you come to my house? Why are you trying to take my daddy from my mommy? You're a bad woman. You're ruining my family, cried the little girl, her voice trembling with emotion. It was obvious that Vera had taught her to say such things. Hearing those words from a child's mouth, the neighbors naturally assumed Courtney was a homewrecker. Look at her, all skin and bones. She's nothing compared to Vera. Austin, don't be stupid, don't ruin your good life. Exactly. A woman like this seducing a married man and destroying someone else's family. Shameless. Courtney stood there, frozen in place, a mix of numbness and panic. She turned to Austin, her eyes pleading for help. This used to be her home. She wasn't the one destroying someone else's family. Vera and her daughter were merely taking advantage of the fact Courtney couldn't speak to defend herself. She desperately hoped Austin would step up to explain, to say something, anything in her defense, but Austin didn't. This is my home. He is my husband. It was your mother who stole my husband. Courtney lost control, grabbing a pen and notebook, frantically writing to vent her emotions. The 5-year-old likely couldn't read, but even so, Austin nervously stepped in front of his wife and child, shielding them and looking at Courtney with pleading eyes. Courtney, she's just a child. Please don't do this in front of so many people, or they will talk about her in the future. I'm begging you. He was begging Courtney to give him dignity, at least in front of his child. Courtney stared at Austin in disbelief, who expected her to endure the shame of being labeled as a mistress to spare his daughter from gossip. Yet it was Vera's fault that his daughter might face such gossip. Vera knew Austin was married but had still done such shameless things back then. Despair surged within Courtney, and she raised her hand, slapping Austin hard across the face. This wasn't just Vera's fault. If Austin hadn't allowed himself to cross the line with Vera, there wouldn't have been a child. How dare you hit my daddy, you had woman. The little girl broke free from Vera's arms, rushing forward and pushing Courtney. Courtney was far too skinny. 5 years of hardship had left her weak and gaunt. The 5-year-old easily knocked her to the ground, her elbow scraping against the pavement and bleeding. Courtney. Austin rushed toward her in a panic, trying to help her up, but she flinched away from him. Courtney's eyes burned with fury and despair as she glared at him. Courtney. Austin called again, but she got up on her own, grabbed her notebook and pen, and ran away in a frenzy. This was supposed to be her home, yet now she was treated like an unwanted intruder, scorned by everyone around her. What a shameless woman. How dare she show up here? Exactly, ruining someone else's family. She has no shame at all. Courtney ran as far as she could, her entire body aching from head to toe. She didn't know how long she had been running when she finally stopped, gasping for air, her legs trembling beneath her. Lifting a hand, she slapped herself hard across the face. The sharp pain dulled her senses, numbing her and emotions. She hated herself for being unable to speak, for being voiceless in the face of such accusations, and for running away like a coward. This was her home. Austin was her husband. She shouldn't have to bear this shame. It took Courtney an entire hour of walking to reach Serene Cove. Standing before the house where she had grown up, she suddenly felt an overwhelming sense of unfamiliarity. Deep down, she clung to a sliver of hope, thinking perhaps Austin had lied. Maybe her parents were still there, waiting for her at home. "Out so late, sweetheart. Can't sleep," a voice called out from the street. A group of delinquents loitered nearby, smoking, one of them whistling at her. Serene Cove had become a dilapidated neighborhood. Ever since the relocation plan was announced, most residents had moved out, leaving the area a haven for troublemakers. After 5 years away, the now unfamiliar surroundings filled Courtney with dread. She clenched her wrist tightly, avoiding eye contact with the hooligans, and hurried deeper into the neighborhood. "Hey, pretty girl, all alone." One of the delinquents, likely drunk, flicked his cigarette to the ground and reached out to grab her. Courtney had always been beautiful, a natural-born beauty since childhood. Her parents had raised her with care, ensuring she excelled in piano, dance, and other arts. These efforts had given her an extraordinary grace and charm, but the 5 years she spent struggling had stripped her of that glow. In the war-torn regions of Zomlonia, her striking appearance had often been more of a curse than a blessing. The man's touch triggered a traumatic response in Courtney. She instinctively slapped him and stumbled backward in fear. The man, startled and enraged by her reaction, raised his hand to strike her in return. Courtney crouched down, arms over her head, trembling as a defensive reflex she had long developed kicked in. But the blow never landed. Instead, she heard a scream of pain, followed by the sound of the man hitting the ground. A shadow loomed over Courtney, shielding her entirely, its sheer size almost engulfing her. Courtney looked up in fear. Backlit by the streetlight, the figure's face was obscured, but the voice alone sent a cold shiver down her spine, leaving her trembling. "Get lost." The man wore a hood, his face still hidden, but his height and commanding presence exuded a menacing aura. He was clearly not someone to mess with. The group of delinquents, sensing trouble, scrambled to their feet, and led without looking back. "Courtney, even after returning home, you're still getting bullied. What am I going to do with you?" The man's voice was hoarse, his tone sharp and laced with an unsettling intensity. Courtney's legs turned to jelly, her entire body trembling in disbelief and shock. It was Hayden Reed's voice. She couldn't believe it. Hayden was supposed to be dead. Yet here he was, back in the country, and standing before her. Hayden was a member of a terrorist organization, and the source of Courtney's darkest nightmares. Courtney couldn't understand why Hayden wasn't dead. When the peacekeeping forces rescued them, she had clearly seen him lying in a pool of blood, shot. At that moment, she could have saved him, but she didn't. To Courtney, Hayden was the enemy, a member of the terrorist organization. She had been desperate to escape. That was why she had left him behind. From that day on, the look of desperation in his eyes as he pleaded for help had haunted her nightmares. "Courtney, you can't escape." Hayden's voice was low, almost predatory, as if he wanted to eat her alive. Summoning courage from who knows where, Courtney seized the moment when his guard was down and bolted for home. Serene Cove was an old apartment complex for government workers and their families. It had no elevators, and her family's unit was on the 3rd floor. The sound-activated lights flickered on and off as she ran frantically up the stairs. For a moment, she forgot her parents were gone. Subconsciously, she still believed home was the safest place she could be. She pounded on the front door, her mouth open, but no sound came out. She wanted to scream for her parents, but she couldn't. Her mutism had started the day she witnessed a colleague being shot in the head right in front of her. The memory of those ruthless terrorists killing her coworker for trying to escape was etched into her mind. Footsteps echoed up the stairs behind her, and Courtney broke down in silent sobs. She still couldn't scream. "Dad, Mom, save me." Courtney screamed in her mind as she banged on the door, but no one answered. The scorch marks on the door reminded her of the truth she had been trying to deny. Austin hadn't lied. Her parents had already gone. "Go ahead, scream, Courtney. Shout for help. Let's see if anyone comes to save you," Hayden taunted, stepping closer until she was cornered. Overwhelmed by terror, Courtney had only one thought: escape. "Courtney, if you're scared, cry out." Hayden pressed her, as if forcing her to speak was his only goal. But instead, Courtney ran toward the stairwell window. She would rather die than fall into his hands. Just as she reached the window, Hayden grabbed her, pulling her into his arms. His voice sounded almost panicked. Damn it, Courtney. I'm sorry, okay. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you. I just wanted you to talk. He pulled down his hood, frantically trying to explain himself. But Courtney, trembling uncontrollably, couldn't hear him. All she could think about was dying. Courtney, your medical team being captured by Lucas wasn't an accident. Hayden shouted, anger flaring, when he realized she was still determined to end her life. Courtney froze, her thoughts spiraling as she slowly turned to look at him in disbelief. She had no idea what he meant back then. Lucas's organization had a massive outbreak of lung disease. You and your teams were experts in the field, Hayden began again. Tee out that someone from your hospital leaked the information to Lucas, which is why found before he could finish, a voice echoed from downstairs. Courtney, are you here? It was Austin, shouting anxiously. When he realized she was missing, he must have guessed she had come back here. Courtney, don't trust anyone from your hospital, Hayden warned, frowning. Then, without another word, he leapt out of the stairwell window. It was the 3rd floor. Courtney stared in disbelief. He was insane. Courtney. Austin rushed up the stairs, breathing heavily. The moment he saw her, he pulled her into a tight embrace. Courtney, I'm so sorry. Let's go home. Courtney stood there, numb, shaking her head slowly. That wasn't her home anymore. Seeing her tear-streaked face, Austin raised his hand and slapped himself hard. I'm sorry. It's all better, it's all my fault. Courtney, hit me if it makes you feel. He kept striking his own face, again and again, as if he wouldn't stop unless Courtney told him to. She didn't stop him, but her own emotions finally broke free. She burst into loud, uncontrollable sobs, crying so hard that it felt like her entire body might shatter. Courtney. Austin cupped her face in his hands, his eyes lighting up with a mix of worry and hope. Her crying, no matter how anguished, was a sign of progress. Austin, a neurosurgeon, had consulted with his colleagues in psychiatry after Courtney developed reactive mutism. Courtney, I'm sorry, Austin said, his voice trembling. Your return caught me off guard. Please, give me time to fix everything. I promise I'll make sure you're never hurt again. His voice broke as he hugged her tighter. You have no idea how much you mean to me. Courtney cried so hard that her vision began to blur from hyperventilation. Hearing him say she was important felt like a cruel joke. Courtney, let's go home. I have so much I want to tell you. His voice cracked with emotion, and maybe he was sincere, but Courtney no longer wanted to hear it. Hayden's words echoed in her mind. Don't trust anyone from your hospital. Her team's capture, the 5 years of suffering, her parents' deaths, all of it, every piece of the nightmare she'd endured, hadn't been a random tragedy. It had been deliberate. Courtney didn't go home with Austin. Instead, she insisted on staying at a hotel. Austin, uneasy about leaving her alone, offered to stay. Courtney scribbled in her notebook. No need. Go home. Courtney, I know you're mad at me, Austin began to explain. After you went missing, I drowned myself in alcohol. Vera spiked my drink, and I mistook her for you. I was furious when I realized and completely cut ties with her, but she wouldn't let go and later claimed she was pregnant, he continued. She refused to terminate the pregnancy and gave birth on her own. Then raised Phoebe to 2 years old, which made me feel bad for her. Courtney's grip tightened on the notebook. Vera had the child through manipulations, yet Austin felt bad for her. She couldn't help but scoff inwardly. Later, Phoebe got sick. Vera had been disowned by Mr. Lewis for having a baby out of wedlock and was kicked out of the house. Desperate, she came to me. Austin went on. At first, I only wanted to help because of Phoebe. Courtney, Phoebe is innocent, Austin said, crouching by the bed, his eyes fixed nervously on Courtney. Courtney remained silent, her thoughts too. Here, Austin, I know you've been through a lot these past years. My biggest regret is letting you go there back then. Austin's voice cracked as he held her hand, his eyes red. But now, words meant nothing. You have to choose me or her. Courtney wrote on the paper. The law only allowed one wife, and Austin needed to make a decision. Courtney, please give me some time, okay? Austin pleaded, gripping her hand tightly. Courtney took a deep breath, lowering her gaze. Her trembling fingers wrote the words. You've made your choice. Austin, let's dissolve our marriage. She had made her decision to leave. No one could know how much it hurt. She had already lost everything. The only thing keeping her going now was uncovering the truth about their abduction and giving her parents the justice they deserved. Courtney. Austin's voice broke as he held her hand tightly, snatching the pen from her grasp. Don't say things like that. Please. I need time to process this. I'm not going to let you go. You know I love you. But Vera, she's been by my side all these years. And Phoebe, she's just a child. It hasn't been easy for her either. I need time to figure things out. Please just give me time, he begged her. The distance between them was no longer just 5 years, it was far greater. Austin's phone kept buzzing incessantly. Frustrated, he declined the call, but the phone rang again moments later. Courtney knew it was Vera. Go home, as she signed, her gestures BRM. Austin seemed to understand and shook his head. Courtney, I spoke with Jack from the psych department. He said your condition is a stress response part of PTSD. What you need right now is companionship, and I'll stay with you until you recover. Courtney pulled her hand back from Austin's grasp, her entire being resisting his touch. She once believed that with Austin by her side, she would slowly heal. He would be her remedy, her solace. But now, he and Vera had become the final straw that broke her spirit. Austin, Phoebe has a fever. What's wrong with you? It's the middle of the night, and why aren't you with your wife and child? Austin's phone rang again, this time with James Lewis, Vera's father, on the other end. Not wanting to upset Courtney further, Austin stood up and walked to the corner to take the call. James, Robert's team has returned. You've probably heard Courtney is back, Austin said softly. There was a long silence on the other end before James finally responded, his tone low and firm. Austin, you know very well how much my daughter has sacrificed for you. She gave you a child and stayed by your side for 5 years. Yes, Courtney used to be your wife, but back then, you had just gotten married. You didn't even have a wedding. You know what choice you need to make, he continued. Your career is on the rise. Think carefully and resolve this mess quickly. After all, Courtney is also a doctor at our hospital, he added with a sharper edge. She has no family left, nothing to hold you back, James reminded him. It's up to you. Okay, Austin replied quietly, glancing back at Courtney instinctively. She sat on the bed, looking quiet yet unbearably forlorn. James was right. Courtney had nothing left, no parents, no voice to defend herself. She had become someone people could disregard or bully. They say the weak always bear the brunt of misfortune. Courtney was living proof of that harsh reality. Courtney, Phoebe is sick. I need to go home, Austin said softly as he walked over to her. He leaned down, intending to kiss her forehead. Courtney flinched away, her fists clenched tightly. Deep down, she understood. Austin had already made his choice. Between her and Vera, he had chosen Vera. Courtney, we're not naive kids anymore. The adult world is harsh, Austin said, crouching in front of her, his gaze intense. But believe me, I love you. I'll make proper arrangements even if we divorce. I'll always protect you. Stay with me, okay? As long as I'm here, I won't let anyone hurt you, he promised. Courtney looked at Austin with disbelief. He wanted to divorce her and then keep her as his mistress. Austin eventually felt a pang of guilt. Nervously avoiding Courtney's gaze, he gripped her hand tightly. Your current situation, if you, Courtney, maybe you don't understand, but I need to protect you. Vera's father is the director of our hospital. Given your want to stay at the hospital, we can't afford to offend them, he said. Courtney looked down at Austin and pulled her hand away with determination. I know it's hard for you to accept this disparity, but Courtney, you're back now, and we need to move forward with our lives, Austin said. I promise, when we have the capability and strength to fight back, I'll make it right for you. I won't let you be a mistress forever, he murmured, trying to comfort her. Seeing Courtney remain silent, Austin assumed she agreed. He pulled her into his arms tightly. I know you understand me. In this society, we're all forced to compromise in some way. We don't have connections or influence. We can't protect anything on our own. Courtney sat there carelessly, the strange feeling spreading like a cold wave that drenched her entirely. It had only been 5 years, but Austin had become so unfamiliar that she was now afraid of him. Get some rest. You're safe here, Austin murmured, leaning in as if to kiss her. But Courtney instinctively turned her head away. Austin froze for a moment, but with no time to explain, he stood and left in a hurry. He was too anxious to pacify both sides. The room fell silent, a silence that made Courtney uncomfortable. In Zomlonia, she hadn't had a single peaceful night's sleep in 5 years. Gunfire, screams, cries, and the pervasive stench of despair and blood filled the air. She had witnessed too much slaughter, too much cruelty. The flames of war raged on, smoke constantly in the air. Whenever they closed her eyes, the memories of the past 5 years played out in her mind. On the day she was captured, she was dragged by the terrorists and thrown into a tent. This one looks good. Take her for the boss, one of the terrorists said just when Courtney was at her most desperate. One of her colleagues, Hale, rushed in, risking everything to knock out the man on top of her. Grabbing her hand, he pulled her along, running for their lives. Even though they both knew none of them would escape, he said, Courtney, hang in there. We have to survive and make it back. Austin is waiting for you, Courtney. Run, he shouted. A gunshot rang out. A bullet grazed Courtney's ear and struck her colleague squarely in the forehead. The screams of her other colleagues, the cries of her mentor, were still vivid in her mind. Courtney could never forget that from that day on, she could no longer utter a single word. The name of the colleague who died saving her was Mark Hoffman. He hadn't lived long enough to tell Courtney that he loved her. "Courtney, have you ever considered that Austin might not be as perfect as you think?" Mark had once tried to bring it up during their drive to their destination. But back then, Courtney was deeply in love with Austin. "Maybe everyone has flaws, but I can accept all of his," she said. At that time, Courtney loved Austin so much. A flicker of hesitation flashed in Mark's eyes. "Courtney, if Austin ever did something to betray you, would you forgive him?" Courtney looked at Mark in surprise. "What are you trying to say?" "I wasn't planning to tell you, but Courtney, can't keep you in the dark. On the day we joined Hennesburg General Hospital, wasn't Austin supposed to come home?" A sudden crash cut Mark off. Their car was violently struck and overturned across the desert sands. Courtney heard gunshots and explosions. Then came a deafening ringing in her ears and dizziness, which lasted for half a minute. By the time she regained consciousness, the entire medical team had already been taken hostage by Lucas. In the bathroom, Courtney hid under the hot water of the shower, letting it pour down on her body relentlessly. She hugged herself tightly, slowly sinking to the floor, forcing herself not to recall those memories. The water washed away her silent tears, but not the pain. The memories lingered in her mind, unrelenting and unforgiving. Thinking back to what Mark had said, Courtney finally understood. What Mark had been trying to tell her then must have been about Austin and Veral. No wonder Vera's child was already 5 years old. From the pregnancy to the birth, Vera and Austin must have been involved long before Courtney left Hennesburg. At that time, she and Austin had just gotten married. It was hard for Courtney to comprehend how the same Austin, who once ran across the entire city during rush hour just to propose to her on time, could have betrayed her so soon after their vows. The pain was excruciating. It felt like her heart was being torn apart. This anguish was far worse than any physical pain she had endured. She banged her head against the shower wall, hating herself for not dying out there. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound. Courtney's overwhelming sorrow was instantly replaced by fear. She quickly turned off the shower, her entire body trembling as she wrapped herself in a towel and inched toward the door. The doorway was empty. Courtney let out a shaky breath of relief. "Leaving your hotel room door unlocked. Courtney, you're really bold." That familiar chilling voice came from behind her. Courtney froze, her entire body stiffening. She turned sharply, fear nearly causing her to collapse. Hayden frowned, stepping forward to catch her, wrapping his arms around her. He pulled her close into his embrace. "Zero send gift commentamed." Courtney struggled desperately, clutching the towel wrapped around her body, as she glared at Hayden with a mix of fear and anger. "What's the point? I've already seen you naked," Hayden sneered. He was the type of man who thrived on being mean, and he would bully Courtney for fun. For 5 long years, he had tortured her. Courtney slapped Hayden's face, her whole body trembling. She had to admit that without Hayden, she wouldn't have survived the battlefield intact. But the nightmares he had brought into her life were something she could never escape. "We've been together for 5 years in Waydon, and this is how you greet me. A slap right off the bat?" Hayden said with a mockingly wounded expression. He was undeniably handsome, sharp, chiseled features, standing 6'2", broad-shouldered, and exuding an air of danger that commanded attention. There was an intensity about him, a magnetic but menacing presence that made people instinctively wary. Hayden was the kind of man who stood out no matter where he went. Even in the desolation of the desert, he seemed to glow with a raw, unrelenting charisma. The first time Courtney saw him, she had been overwhelmed by his imposing aura and striking appearance. She had demanded to know why he had joined a terrorist organization, and he had said it was all for profit. People all live for profit. Hayden was a smuggler, wanted by customs authorities. Desperation had driven him to ally with Lucas, the leader of a terrorist group. Lucas trusted Hayden deeply. Hayden, a master of strategy and warfare, had devised countless plans for Lucas, helping him rise above the other militant factions. He was Lou's closest advisor, second only to the leader himself. "Shut up," Courtney signed with her hands, her gestures sharp and deliberate. Hayden was one of the few people who understood her sign language. With a sigh, he leaned against the wall, raising his hands in mock surrender. "I just came to bring you a phone. Did your dear husband even notice you don't have one? Leaving you here without any way to call for help. What if something happened?" he said. Words subtly criticizing Austin. He was almost telling Courtney directly that Austin didn't love. Hayden's tone was laced with feigned grievance. "Each will her anymore. I don't need your fake kindness," Courtney signed, her hands trembling as she communicated her defiance. Hayden reached out and grabbed Courtney's arm, pulling her closer. "Fake kindness, Courtney, do you even have a conscience?" If it weren't for me, would you have survived? Courtney's anger flared. She raised her hand to slap him again, but he easily caught her wrist. His hand was large, wrapping around her delicate wrist effortlessly. He held her firmly but cautiously, as if afraid to apply too much pressure, as though her arm might break with the slightest force. For a brief moment, a flicker of something softer, perhaps guilt or tenderness, flashed in his eyes. But it vanished almost instantly. Courtney admitted that Hayden was cruel, nasty, and loved bullying her, but he had never truly forced her to do anything against her will. Most of it was just an act to maintain appearances in front of Lucas and his men. Once Courtney had asked Hayden why he chose to help her. With his usual smirk, he had replied, "Because you're beautiful. I want to see when you'll fall for me and agree to be my wife." Courtney had snapped back, furious, "Don't even think about it. I'm married and I love my husband deeply." She had believed that returning home would mean leaving everything behind, finally ridding herself of the nightmare that was Hayden. But reality had delivered a cruel blow. "Why are you here? Aren't you afraid I'll call the police?" Courtney gestured. Hayden didn't answer. Instead, he opened a first aid kit, pulled out some antiseptic and cotton swabs, and grabbed her wrist to tend to her wounds. His expression was dark, his anger palpable. After a long silence, he finally asked, "Who did this?" Back in the chaos of the terrorist camps and battlefields, he had never let Courtney be harmed. Now, freshly returned home, she was already hurt. Which infuriated Hayden. "Mind your own business." Courtney turned her face away as she tried to pull her arm free. But in that moment, the emotions she had been suppressing broke loose, and tears began streaming uncontrollably down her face. Hayden didn't let go. Instead, he continued carefully treating her wounds, his movements oddly gentle, as if he truly cherished her. Courtney couldn't bring herself to look at Hayden, who was part of a terrorist organization. She knew that for the past 5 years, Hayden had been her shield, protecting her time and Ogham. But she couldn't spare this terrorist because of that. "If I have minded my own business, you wouldn't still be alive." "Drop the attitude," Hayden muttered, tossing the used cotton swabs into the trash. He took out a brand new phone, inserted a SIM card, and handed it to her. "I've saved my number in the contact list. If you're me, I'm more reliable than that cheated husband of yours. Ever in danger, call." Courtney's face flushed with anger. She hated hearing anyone mentioning Austin. Instinctively, she raised her hand to slap him again, but this time, Hayden grabbed her and pinned her onto the bed. "Courtney, have I been spoiling you too much these past years?" Hayden growled, his brows furrowing. Roughly, he yanked the towel off her, a predatory glint in his eyes as if he was about to devour her whole. "He always scared her like this." Courtney broke down, tears streaming uncontrollably. For once, it was Hayden who panicked. Dour cry. Furzori. Hayden's tour was hard, but Lee's apologies always came quickly. Courtney once thought Hayden had a theatrical personality, always performing for attention. But over time, she realized he reserved totters. He was emotionless, barely bothering witty. "I don't love anywhere to go. Let me sleep for a while, even a word more than necessary." He flipped over onto the bed, seamlessly closing his eyes. Courtney stood quickly, reaching for her unwashed clothes on the floor to pot them back on. "I brought you clades and toiletries. They're on the sofa," Hayden said in a low voice, still not opening his eyes. Silencing over at the sofa, Kamuri notices a bag containing perfectly fitting clothes along with women's facial cleanser and skincare products. But instead of using them, she stubbornly put them in, and curled up on the sofa like a small, defiant lard. After about half an hour of sitting there, stewing in her frustration, Courtney couldn't take it anymore. She marched to the bedside, staring down at the peacefully sleeping Hayden. It seemed that he had taken this place as his own home. Courtney found this terrorist really charneless. Courtney gestured, giving him a firm joust. Hayden didn't open his eyes, leaving her with no options. Her frustration bottled over, and for a fleeting moment, she contemplated grabbing a pillow and smothering him. However, the sharp scent of blood, underneath, Hayden was wearing a white back to her senses. Chut of instinct as a doctor, Courtney reached out and pulled open his jacket. Hurt songed through with blood. Courtney gasped, quickly lifting his shirt to reveal a blouse-style piece of gauze taped to his upper chest. It was obvious the gunshot wound he'd suffered earlier wasn't properly healed, and now it was bleeding again. For a moment, Courtney could only Hayden's sheer lack. She had seen him fall, riddled with ballers, lying in a pool of his own blood. How he had survived was nothing short of a miracle, or maybe it was thanks to the solid muscle that covered his frame. Hayden's physique was impressive. Not an ounce still looked like he belonged on a runway. Sari fat, his build exuded strength. He was the kind of man who could wear anything. Courtney gave him another push. He was burning up with fever, completely unresponsive. If he didn't get to a hospital soon, he could very well die. Courtney's gaze fell on the new phone lying beside her. After a long moment of silence, she finally dialed the police. When the call connected and the officer on the other end started asking questions, she found herself unable to say a single word. In the end, she hung up and resorted to texting the police instead. It didn't take long for them to arrive. Both Courtney and Hayden were taken to the station, since the police needed a full account of the situation on the way. A faint, exhausted smile at Courtney. Courtney, you really are heartless. To you why there. Hayden woke up, his face pale. Brute. Courtney turned away, signing sharply, you're a criminal. Even if you escaped before, the law will catch up to. Hayden didn't respond. For once, he seemed eerily calm and cooperative. Courtney started to wonder if he had truly changed. As soon as they entered the station, a middle-aged man in a military uniform approached them. Without a word, he slapped Hayden across the face. What the hell were you thinking, running around instead of staying in the hospital? Hayden frowned and moaned under his breath, I have to do this, or I would have lost the love of my life. Courtney looked at the middle-aged man in astonishment. She recognized him. It was Tyson Fraley, the peacekeeper who had led the mission to Tracker her team. This situation isn't something I can explain in just a few words, Tyson said. It's classified, but what I can tell you is this, Hayden is one of ours. 5 years ago, he was assigned to go undercover within Lacasse organizations. Because of his work, we were able to dismantle Lucas's terrorist network in such a short time, he explained to Courtney. Courtney stood frozen in place, struggling to process the revelation. It was too much to accept all at once. Uncle Tyson, don't scare her. She's timid, Hayden quipped, raising an eyebrow as he offered a smile. Cut the crap. Go back to the hospital, Tyson barked, his frustration clear. After all, Hayden's actions fell under disobedience to orders. Hayden didn't argue. He simply turned to Courtney, his gaze carrying a wounded softness. Courtney, you've abandoned me twice now. I'll haunt you for the rest of my life. Don't think you can get rid of me. Wait for me. Courtney stood rooted to the spot, numb and overwhelmed. Even after Tyson escorted Hayden away, she still couldn't recover from the shock. Hayden, a man whose meanness and arrogance had made her believe the worst of him, was actually an undercover agent sent by the peacekeeping forces. Just like Lucas, Courtney had never suspected that someone as blatantly malicious as Hayden could possibly be working for the law. His performance had been flawless, his disguise impenetrable. After leaving the police station, Courtney's phone rang. The sound startled her. She hadn't touched a phone in 5 years, and had nearly forgotten that Hayden had bought her one. Holding the phone in her hand, Courtney felt dazed. She now knew that Hayden was a police officer, and she wondered if he would hate her for leaving him bleeding on that battlefield, choosing to escape alone. What took you so long to answer? Hayden's voice came through the line. Did I scare you? He asked softly. Once I've recovered, I'll come find you. I've set up a WhatsApp account for you using your number. Try logging in. The password is your birthday. Courtney stood frozen, her fists clenched tightly. Knowing she wouldn't respond, Hayden continued speaking, undeterred. I've transferred $20,000 to you. Hearing her breathing quicken, Hayden spoke again. That's all I've got. Consider it a loan. You can pay me back when you have the money. Courtney's fingers tightened around the phone. Just as she was about to hang up, Hayden added, buy yourself whatever you want. He sounded like a chatterbox, completely at odds with the impatient voice of Tyson in the background. Hayden carried on regardless. Remember what I told you, don't trust anyone at the hospital. Did you hear me? If you did, snap your fingers. Courtney didn't move. She quietly ended the call. She stared down at the phone, unable to understand the meaning behind Hayden's actions. Back in Wedgton, she had abandoned him, left him to die. Just now, she had called the police on him. She had shown nothing but hostility toward Hayden, yet he seemed entirely unfazed, as if none of it mattered. Courtney was confused by him. The next morning, Courtney headed to Hennesburg General Hospital, where her mentor, Robert Anderson, and senior colleague, Lorraine Evans, were waiting for her at the entrance. On the day Courtney returned to the country, they had both given her their contact information. After she got a phone, she reached out to them. Courtney, Robert said, looking at her with a heartbroken expression. It was clear that they had already heard about Austin's remarriage. After all, they all worked at the same hospital. Lorraine's face was dark with anger. Courtney, don't be so soft. And don't try to stop me. I'm going to tear that bitch apart. Courtney's eyes reddened, but she forced a smile. Robert, who had a limp from an old injury in Weydon, gazed at her with deep sympathy. Courtney, I also heard about your parents. Robert had been childhood friends with Courtney's father and was also her teacher. Their families were close. As he spoke, his voice began to choke with emotion. During the 5 years in Weydon, Robert had come to see Courtney as his own dog lure. The news of her parents' passing hit him hard. He hadn't slept all night, and his hair seemed visibly grayer. Lorraine turned away, her eyes red. Lorraine was someone who wore her emotions on her sleeve. Back in Waydon, she had been the one who looked after Courtney the most. Their team had consisted of 6 people. Mark Ludd died, and only 5 had made it back. Robert, if it weren't for Courtney, we wouldn't have come back alive, Lorraine said in a hoarse voice. She saved all of us. As she spoke, Lorraine began to cry. From now on, we're Courtney's family, Robert nodded, his eyes wet with tears. Yes, Courtney, from now on, we're your family. Chapter 2. Courtney stood there, numb, staring down at the ground as tears fell silently. Robert, you're all here. The other team members had arrived, their faces grim. This time, the hospital has to give us an explanation. We were injured in the line of duty. This is a workplace injury, and they must compensate us. That's right. They owe us compensation for all 5 years of losses, especially the mental anguish outside the director's office building. The team members were visibly agitated. After such a traumatic experience, being declared missing for 5 years, the impact on their families and personal lives was immense. Courtney, Lorraine gently held Courtney's hand, her voice soft as she tried to comfort her. Stop blaming yourself for Mark's death. Even if we could go back, he'd still choose to save you. You need to let it go. Not speaking up will only hurt you more in the long run. She sighed deeply, already imagining the challenges Courtney would face because of her silence. Give me back my son. At the entrance of the hall, Mark's parents were crying. The entire team had made it back, except for Mark. He would never return. Courtney stood frozen in place, her entire body stiff, her hands clenched into tight fists. If Mark had let her die back then, he might have made it back alive. James Lewis, give me back my son. Mark's mother wailed, clutching a framed photo of her son. What's all the fuss about? The peacekeeping mission was arranged by higher-ups, and you all volunteered for it. So stop playing the victims now. Vera stepped out of the elevator, her expression dark. No one died. Expect Mark. He must have done something stupid. Vera, how could you say such a thing? You're a monster. Lorraine snapped and lunged at Vera, but the others quickly held her back. Vera snorted dismissively. The compensation plan will be announced soon. And let's not forget, this might even help you all get promotions. You want money, right? Let's just sit down and talk it out. There's no need for all this drama. The sharp sound of a slap echoed throughout the hall. Everyone, including Lorraine, was stunned. It was Courtney who had stepped forward and struck Vera across the face. Send gift. Vera seemed stunned, covering her face as she looked at Courtney in shock. Courtney's breath came in short gasps. She swiftly swung her hand again and slapped Vera across the face. Seeing this, the hospital staff rushed forward to try to stop Courtney. Lorraine, however, didn't try to stop Courtney. Instead, she pinned Vera down. Courtney, go on. Courtney, trembling all over, stared at Vera, then raised her hand and gestured. You don't have the right to speak about Mark. Vera glared at Courtney furiously. How dare you slap me? Courtney, who do you think you are? You've lost both your parents and you're a mute now. You've been violated by countless people in South Waydon. Why are you acting so arrogant? Courtney gritted her teeth, tears welling up in her eyes. Her parents had left the world. She had been trapped in Waydon for the hospital and peace, yet Vera, the daughter of the hospital's director, was using her pain to attack her. She felt like being stabbed in the chest. What did you say? Say it again, Vera. You're really horrendous, taking advantage of Austin when he was vulnerable. You shameless bitch, Lorraine snapped, pushing past others, grabbing Vera's hair, and starting to strike. Having spent 5 years in Waydon, Lorraine was a good fighter, and Vera was no match for her. Help! Somebody help, they're attacking me. Vera cried out desperately, but no one dared intervene. Even the security guards were stopped by Mark's family. Vera had brought this upon herself. She had been asking for a fight. The elevator doors opened, and the hospital director, James, along with Austin, stepped out. Austin, seeing the scene spiral out of control, rushed forward to protect Vera. Lorraine, let go of her. If you hit her again, I'll call the police. Lorraine was shoved aside by Austin, losing her balance and falling to the ground. Courtney stepped forward and in front of Austin, slapped Vera once more. Then, she bent down and quickly wrote something on aid. Go ahead, call the police, and let them arrest me. A piece of paper. Austin frowned, as if he couldn't believe Courtney would beat someone. Courtney, are you really going to join in their madness? Courtney trembled all over, her eyes burning with unshed tears as she wrote quickly. They just want an explanation. The higher-ups will give you an explanation. You can't cause a scene here. Austin grabbed Courtney's wrist. Come with me now. Behave yourself. Vera, still clutching her face, glared at Courtney with malice. Courtney, why do you look so afraid when I said you've been violated by countless people in Waydon? Vera, Austin shouted at her, his chest heaving with rage. Vera looked at Austin with tears in her eyes. Austin, today you have to choose between me and her. I'm telling you, if you choose her, you'll lose me. If you choose me, there's no place for her. Austin, you're a jerk. Courtney's been missing for just a few years and you've already married this bitch. Lorraine shouted, pointing at Austin's Pi Omicron Sigma. Robert, too, was deeply disappointed in Austin. I never thought you'd do something like this. Do you have any idea what Courtney has been through these 5 years? She's always believed you'd wait for her. Austin lowered his head in guilt. Stop with the moral high ground, Vera yelled, her voice frenzied. Everyone thought you were dead. You want Austin to? That's not realistic. Oh wait, T forever for hurt. She turned to Austin, desperate. Austin, I've been with you these 5 years. You have to make a choice. Enough. A deep voice boomed from behind. James stepped forward, scolding them sharply. This is a hospital. A place for saving lives. Look at what you're all doing. Everyone fell silent, no one daring to speak. James continued. I know everyone has suffered a lot over the years, but the fact that we made it back safely is a blessing in itself. As for Mark, he bowed deeply to Mark's family. I will do everything in my power as the hospital director to help. We are all professionals here, so I don't want any more trouble in this hospital. Courtney clenched the pen in her hand, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to write on her notebook, asking who had leaked out their whereabouts. But she remembered that Hayden had told her not to trust anyone, which meant the person who had sold them out could have been anyone at the hospital. Let's all calm down, James spoke softly, trying to soothe everyone. Those who need to return to work, go ahead. Those who need rest, take it. If anyone has any requests, bring them up. We'll handle it privately. Everyone was quiet, except OT Mark's parents, who were crying uncontrollably. Digging into her palm, Courtney's grip tightened on the pen, the tip of it. She would make sure Mark didn't die in vain. She would uncover the truth. She owed it to Mark's parents to find out who had betrayed them, and she would make sure those responsible faced justice. As long as the money and benefits are in place, no one will keep causing trouble. These people are simply not satisfied with what they've gotten, greedy and never enough. Vera muttered coldly. Austin shot her an angry look. Shut up. Vern looked defiantly at Austin. Today, in front of my father and everyone here, you need to make things clear. Do you want me or do you want her? Yes, with her, you'll never see me or Phoebe again, she declared. I don't want to be shamed as a mistress just because of her return. If you don't cut ties, all eyes turn to Austin. Send gift 0. Courtney, I know you've suffered, but you can't change what has already happened, James said as he walked over and patted Courtney's shoulder. He then looked at Austin. You need to make a decision. It's the perfect moment to do so in front of everyone. Don't make it harder for my daughter. Austin, you'd better make the right choice, Lorraine said angrily, clenching her fists. Courtney turned her gaze to Austin. Everyone was waiting for Austin to answer. Parents were still. Lorraine couldn't finish, her voice. Vera, you're only bullying Courtney because you know she has no one to back her up. If her pee breaking into sobs, Courtney's grip tightened on the pen, the tip of it digging into her palm, blood soaking through her fingers. Lorraine was right. These people were all bullying her because she had no family backing her up. Courtney, I'm sorry. Finally, Austin spoke those words in front of everyone. Austin, you bastard, Lorraine yelled at him uncontrollably. Austin, what you've done is unforgivable, others chimed in, speaking up for Courtney. After all, they wouldn't have made it back alive without her. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I can't think straight right now, so please don't force me to make a choice. Austin hesitated. He couldn't make a decisive choice for the sake of his own benefit, nor could he firmly choose Courtney for the sake of his feelings. Thus he stood there, caught in the middle, indecisive. Vera was clearly angered. She had expected Austin to choose her without question. Austin, Vera yelled at him, then glared at Courtney, her voice filled with madness. Don't get too smug. He won't choose you. We'll see how this plays out. With that, Vera stormed off. Austin stood there, wanting to take Courtney's hand. Courtney, give me some time. Courtney instinctively pulled her hand away, looking at Austin with cold indifference and distance. Everyone, please go to the conference room. Mr. Lewis will give you all an explanation, a spokesperson from the hospital's public relations department said, urging everyone to head to the conference room to discuss the compensation policy. Courtney didn't go. She didn't want compensation, and she would never compromise. They had been hijacked by terrorists in South Waydawn, and it wasn't an accident. Those people had known their route and were aware they were Aspera in infectious diseases. Over the 5 years, Courtney had suspected this, but there had been no concrete evidence. Since Hayden was an undercover cop, he wouldn't have said anything without a reason. Courtney stayed. Lorraine didn't go either. She stayed by Courtney's side. Suggest you go to the conference room or you'll end up with nothing, wasting your time, Vera said, stepping out of the conference room and Lorraine. After all, what's done is done, right? Lorraine tell a surge of anger and wanted to kick Vera. Courtney stopped Lorraine, writing quickly on a notepad. Lorraine, you go inside. Listen to what they say and fight for what you durn of at Courtney. But you the country sign singly dilly. Then wait for Moore outside. Courtney nodded in propuner. Everyone can stay at the hospital except for you, country. Don't even tank about it, Vera steered, stepping closer to Courtney as the hallway emptied, her voice dripping with mockery. AMD, just a little pressure, and you can't even speak anymore. You really deserve it. You should have just died over there. She glared at Courtney madly. There's no precedent for a mute doctor at our hospital, Vera scoffed. You're pathetic. You've lost your parents and your husband was no longer yours. You have no power, no background, and now you can't even speak. You'll lose your job, too. How are you going to survive? Why don't you just end it all? Courtney clenched her fists tightly, glaring at Vera. Vera was James' daughter. She had been arrogant and spoiled since school, the epitome of a rich, pampered young lady. Courtney simply raised her hand, and Vera stepped back in fear, thinking Courtney would hit her again. But Courtney only adjusted her hair, and Vera gritted her teeth. Remember those slaps you gave me today? Listen carefully, Courtney, you have nothing now. Your parents are gone, and no one will protect you anymore. With the Lewis family's status in Hennesburg and our power in this hospital, I can easily make sure you'll never survive here, she threatened. Vera took out a card. This card has $30,000 on it. If you're smart, take the money and leave Hennesburg. Never show your face here again. Otherwise, I'll make you regret coming back alive. Courtney picked up her notepad and wrote, The Lewis family isn't untouchable in Hennesburg. Vera sneered, eyes full of sarcasm. You still don't understand, do you? My sister Marilyn has long been engaged to the Reed family, the most powerful family in Hennesburg. I'm sure you've heard of them, haven't you? She went on. The Reed family is so powerful here that no one in Hennesburg can afford to cross them. Courtney took a deep breath and sneered, thinking that the Lewis family and the Reed family were all a bunch of rich bastards. I'm waiting to see what you can do to me, Courtney wrote, then reached out and took Vera's card, tossing it directly into the trash can. Vera's brow furrowed as she gave a mocking laugh. Very well, Courtney. From now on, every day, I make you regret still being alive. I see you've become disconnected from society after being kidnapped for 5 years. You probably don't know this, but to me, people with no background and no family are just bugs. I can crush you with ease, she added. Courtney glared at Vera with anger, writing, Wait and see comment. Vera was too confident. She didn't see Courtney as a threat anymore. Courtney had lost her parents, leaving her with no support. The person she once relied on, Austin, was no longer in a position to fully stand by her side. Therefore, Vera looked down at Courtney, exuding the attitude of a victor. The meeting hadn't satisfied anyone, so it ended quickly and uneventfully. Lorraine walked out of the conference room and stood by Courtney's side. James said no one's compensation will exceed $1,000. A life lost, 5 years of hellish suffering, and the compensation was merely $1,000. What about Mark? Courtney didn't care about the compensation. She wanted to know how the hospital would handle Mark's sacrifice. Mark had died trying to save others. He deserved recognition, and Courtney hoped the hospital would honor him. James only mentioned a compensation of $1,000 for his family. He didn't mention anything else, said Lorraine. As soon as Lorraine finished speaking, Courtney stormed into the room. She lost control and grabbed James by the collar, her eyes filled with rage. Mark sacrificed himself. He's a hero. Courtney's fingers trembled as she gestured, but when she saw James didn't understand, she pulled out her notepad and wrote, Mark is a hero. The hospital should honor him. Mark's mother was crying weakly, resting in his father's arms. Courtney couldn't bear to look at them, her gaze fixed solely on James. The honor you're talking about is decided by the government, not me. Besides, no one knows exactly what happened in Waydon. Based on just your word, James was dismissing her. It was clear that he wouldn't report it to the authorities. Courtney lost control, shaking him, her sorrow and anger making her body tremble violently. Courtney, don't cause trouble here. Mark's family has agreed not to pursue it further. What are you even doing here? And what's your relationship with Mark? Why do you care so much? Vera rolled her eyes, mocking her. Austin, still caring for Courtney, stepped forward and tried to hug her. Courtney, we'll talk about this after. Please, calm down. Courtney pushed Austin away, her eyes filled with defiance as she stared at James. Lit her eyes made it clear to James if Mark didn't receive the honor he deserved, she wouldn't let it go. James looked livid, his voice low and reluctant as he finally said, Fine. I'll report it. Only then did Courtney release her grip, collapsing to the floor in exhaustion. Courtney. Austin patted her on the back, trying to comfort her. Courtney, don't get too worked up, breathe deeply. You can't let take over, it's not good for your recovery. Courtney didn't move, nor did she acknowledge Austin. Your emotions. James shot Austin a look, his expression grim. With a huff, he turned and left. Vera gripped her hands tightly, her teeth clenched. Austin, Phoebe says she misses you. You're not on night duty tonight, so go home and see her. Austin looked at Courtney, then at Vera. You take care of Phoebe. I've arranged for Jack from the psych department to help Courtney with her inability to speak. Austin, I'm your wife. Vera snapped, her anger rising. Lorraine stood at the door with a cold laugh. Courtney was there before you. Have some shame, Vera. You're just the other girl. Vera gritted her teeth, shooting a hateful glance at Courtney. Courtney, just wait. With that, she stormed off in anger. Austin, how could you do this after so many years with Courtney? She's only been missing for 2 years, and you remarried so quickly, Lorraine questioned Austin, as the room now only held the three of them. Pregnant and secretly gave birth to the baby. Austin gently held Courtney's hand, speaking in a low voice. I'm also a victim in this. She was preg that time, Mr. Lewis was also pressuring me. If I didn't marry her. He didn't finish his sentence. Maybe what he said was true, but it was clear that James had promised him some benefits. In the end, Austin had compromised for the sake of his own interests. Lorraine opened her mouth but said nothing further. You've been apart for 5 years. Go spend time together and rebuild your relationship. I'll go now. But you take care of Courtney. If she is unwell, I won't forgive you. Lorraine gave Courtney a concerned glance, but she couldn't intervene too much in her relationship. Reluctantly, she left. Courtney sat on the floor, watching as Austin held her hand. The feeling was so strange, almost repulsive. Courtney, once the meeting room was empty. Austin finally exhaled, gently lifting Courtney into his arms. The floor's cold. Courtney tried to push him away, but he held her tightly. He clung to her, as though making sure she was really there in his arms. Austin sat on the couch, just like before, holding Courtney in his arms. She was so thin that he could hold her with one arm. Austin hugged her tightly, his voice rough with emotion. Courtney, it hurts me to see you like this. Courtney remained numb, held by him. Once, she loved being held by him like this, comforted by his embrace. But now, she just wanted to throw. The thought of Austin spending these years with Vera, and having a child with her, made her sick. I'll divorce Vera. You're my wife. Courtney, just give me some time, please, Austin promised. Courtney remained silent, numb and careless as Austin spoke to her. She simply wrote in her notebook, I want to stay at the hospital. She knew Vera would use her inability to speak as an excuse to have her removed from the hospital. But Courtney had to stay. She needed to find out who the traitor was, to give Mark the justice he deserved, and to give herself and everyone else justice. I talked to them in the meeting. Your situation is special, and I've arranged for some treatment time for you. Just cooperate with the therapy. If you can speak again, you can keep your job. Austin grabbed Courtney's hand and comforted her. Talk to Jack, let him check on you, okay, he continued. Courtney nodded. Austin seemed relieved, as though satisfied with her compliance. Courtney, last night was an exception. Phoebe was sick, but tonight I'll stay with you. How about that? Courtney couldn't help but find him ridiculous. It seemed as though Austin believed he was doing her a favor, like he was a king, and his time was a gift she should be grateful for. Going to change and get the car keys. Austin glanced at his watch, and then affectionately rubbed her hair. Wait here for me. Courtney didn't move, nor did she speak. Austin took her silence as obedience. He left the conference room. The buzz of a message pulled Courtney's attention. She glanced at the screen. It was a WhatsApp message from an unfamiliar contact. Hayden had helped her set up a WhatsApp account, and she had logged in last night, adding Lorraine and Robert. Honey, do you miss me? It was Hayden. His profile was completely black, no picture, giving off a mysterious and cool vibe. His words, however, immediately revealed his playful nature. Courtney opened the profile, ready to block him, but then she hesitated. The guilt from when she had let Hayden suffer in Waydon resurfaced. She finally chose to reply. Hayden, please don't call me that. Courtney replied seriously. Hayden sent a pouty emoji in response. Courtney, take care of yourself. Hayden, do you care about me? Courtney, just a doctor's concern. Hayden, honey, my wound hurts so much. The doctors here aren't as gentle as you. Hayden, Courtney, I miss you so much. I feel like I can't go a day without seeing you. Seeing the messages, Courtney was angered and embarrassed. She quickly exited the conversation. Dad, how could you agree to report this? We should be covering it up, not reporting it. If Mark's case goes higher, you'll definitely be punished, Vera's voice echoed from the hallway. Just as Courtney was about to delete Hayden's contact, she heard Vera's voice. Her heart sank as she heard James's deep voice respond. I'm only comforting her. I won't report it. In fact, we can't report it. We need to suppress this quickly and make sure to silence Mark's parents. The door handle to the conference room turned. Courtney quickly rolled off the couch and hid behind it. James and Vera didn't realize that Courtney was still there and thought she had already left. Dad, how can we silence Mark's parents? Mark was their only child and I don't think they'll just let this go, Vera said, sounding worried. We barely managed to suppress this. If it blows up, what if it leads back to us? We'll start with money. If that doesn't work, we'll use other methods. We can't rush it, but we can't delay it either. James leaned against the conference table and spoke casually. I don't know how they managed to come back alive. Vera hissed, grinding her teeth. Why didn't they just die out there, especially that Courtney? James glanced at Vera. You've been spoiled by your mother. You've already won, so why are you still worried about a defeated opponent? The more you care, the more insecure you seem. Dad, just look at the way Austin looks at Courtney. He was obsessed with her. If I don't do anything, she'll steal him from me, Vera said, a hint of frustration in her voice. But her father was not worried at all. You're overthinking it. Austin is the successor I've chosen. His thirst for power and interests far exceeds his feelings for Courtney. Just think of our status. I heard the eldest son of the Reed family is coming back soon. After Marilyn marries him, our position in Hennisburg will be even more unshakable. Austin is clever enough to make the right choice. James was confident. I envy Marilyn. Her future husband is the only heir to the Reed family. Vera's mood brightened and she snuggled up to James. Dad, once she marries him, we'll never have to take that humiliation again, James nodded. Instead of wasting time being angry, you should think of how to make your husband stay. All men are sentimental. A man's for love holds a significant place in his heart, but that doesn't mean it outweighs his interests, Vera gritted her teeth. Dad, I still don't feel secure. I have to kick Courtney out of this hospital to be given Austin 6 months. If after 6 months Courtney still can't speak, then it won't be my fault for not keeping her here, James said in a low voice. Vera sneered. 6 months. That's more than enough time for me to make her disappear behind the couch. Courtney was trembling as she gripped her phone. Although she didn't yet have proof that James and Vera had betrayed their medical team, their conversation made it clear that they were involved. She had recorded their conversation, but she wasn't very familiar with the phone. In her panic, she accidentally hit the camera button while trying to save the recording. The clicking sound echoed and the conference room instantly fell silent. James and Vera's eyes snapped toward her. Courtney's entire body tensed, realizing she had been caught. Send gift. Courtney quickly jumped to her feet, clutching her phone tightly and eyeing James and Vera warily. James's expression shifted, his eyes turning sharp. Courtney, what did you hear? Courtney gripped her phone even tighter, slowly moving toward the door. Dad, I heard her take a picture. She's definitely recording. Vera's mind was racing now. Courtney took a deep breath and turned, sprinting toward the door. James's face tightened with fear. If Courtney left and told others what she had heard, or worse, spread the recording, they would be in real trouble. Dad, she's running away. Vera stomped her foot in frustration. Call Zaid. Have him find Courtney and handle this, James ordered in a low voice. Vera nodded and quickly dialed Zaid's number. Zaid Herring was the Lewis family's enforcer, the one who dealt with the family's dirty work. He worked as a security guard at the hospital. She's still in the administrative building. Yes, find her and take care of it. The footage is on her phone. Vera's voice was low and firm. Courtney. Just then, Austin returned, pushing open the door to find James and Vera inside. Vera, flustered, quickly ended the call and hid her phone behind her back. Austin. Austin looked at Vera suspiciously. What's going on? Where's Courtney? James glanced at Austin and spoke calmly. Austin, I was just discussing Mark's compensation plan with Vera. We may have used some harsh words, and we didn't know Courtney was hiding behind the sofa. She must have recorded it. We're in a digital age, and if she spreads the recording, he continued. Courtney wouldn't do that, Austin immediately countered. Vera glared at Austin angrily. You're still protecting her. If she dares to send that out and cause harm to my dad and me, I won't let her get away with it. She won't. I'll talk to her. You two just stay calm. Austin frowned, glancing at James. He knew James had his ways, but he wasn't going to ignore Courtney. James narrowed his eyes and stopped the jealous Vera. Austin, convince Courtney to delete the footage. Whatever she wants, let her ask. Austin nodded. Don't worry, I'll make sure she deletes it. James patted Austin on the shoulder. We're family. Our fortunes are intertwined. The Lewis family's interests are your interests. Austin didn't. Residential. Vera, still angry, glared at Austin. When are you going to annul your marriage with Hurt? Austin frowned. Vera, can you give me some time? Vera scoffed. You know I'm not patient. If you don't do it, I'll handle it myself. With that, Vera stormed off. Austin rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of the situation, then hurried to find Courtney. Courtney! Courtney, he shouted. He was genuinely worried something would happen to her. He had seen how the Lewis family operated. On the first floor, as Courtney was leaving the administrative building, she was cornered by Zaid. Zaid tried to snatch Courtney's phone, and in panic, Courtney fled, hiding in the storage room. Come out! Zaid shouted, kicking the door. Courtney felt a pang of fear. She didn't know how to protect the video she had recorded. As Zaid was about to find her, Courtney, in a panic, opened WhatsApp and sent the video to Hayden. The signal in the storage room was poor, and the video was uploading slowly. Courtney anxiously waited, and just as Zaid kicked the door open, the video was finally sent. The door was kicked open, and Zaid yanked Courtney by her hair, dragging her out forcefully. Where's the phone? Hand it over. Courtney clutched her phone tightly, but she was no match for Zaid. The phone was ripped from her hands. At that moment, Hayden called. Zaid hung up the phone, frustrated by his inability to unlock Courtney's phone. Tell me the password. Courtney refused. He raised his hand as if to hit her. Courtney. Austin appeared, stepping forward to land a punch on Zaid, then grabbed Courtney's phone back. Get lost. Don't touch her. Austin stood protectively in front of Courtney. Zaid shot Austin a cold look, then slowly backed away, turning to leave. Phone. Courtney signed, gesturing for Austin to give it back in her. Courtney, what did you record? Let's delete it. Okay. Listen, that thing won't do you any good. Austin said. This society is more complicated than you think. The Lewis family control everything. You won't gain anything by going against them, so listen to me, he continued, still not handing her the phone. He didn't even check to see if Courtney was hurt, instead trying to unlock her phone. The first attempt failed, but on the second try, Austin unlocked it because the password was Courtney's birthday. Give it back. Courtney angrily gestured, rising to grab her phone. Austin hesitated, not wanting to hurt her, but he trapped her in his arms. However, he still opened the photo gallery and deleted the video and pictures. Courtney finally managed to snatch her phone back and glared at Austin with fury. She raised her hand and slapped Austin. Austin didn't dodge, instead forcibly holding Courtney in his arms. Courtney, I'm doing this for your own good. Courtney felt disgusted by him. She pushed him away forcefully, limping toward the door. Her foot was injured, having been stomped on by Zaid earlier, and it seemed like her ankle had been dislocated. But the pain in her ankle was nothing compared to the coldness in her heart. Austin had changed. He was no longer the Austin she remembered. It took a long time, but Courtney finally made it to the hospital entrance. Courtney, just as she stepped out of the hospital, a tall figure rushed toward her, pulling her into a tight embrace. It was Hayden. His heartbeat was rapid, and he wore a baseball cap. The smell of blood still lingered on his chest, and he was wearing a hospital gown under his col. Hayden must have been afraid something had happened to Courtney. The moment he received her video, he rushed out. He only knew one thing: he couldn't let anything happen to Courtney. Courtney. Just then, Austin also came rushing out. As soon as he reached the door, he saw a stranger holding Courtney in his arms. His expression darkened immediately, and his gaze became sharp and cautious. Courtney tightly clutched Hayden's coat, her body tense and trembling. She didn't want to see Austin, not even a glance. Seeing Courtney was shaking, Hayden shot a cold, sharp look at Austin before taking off his coat and draping it over her shoulders. Let's go, he said firmly. Courtney, who is he? Austin approached, his eyes narrowing as he fixed his gaze on Hayden. Austin didn't care about Courtney's limping, injured leg. Instead, he was questioning her about the man who made him feel a sense of insecurity. Who are you? Hayden asked nonchalantly. His height made him seem like he could completely shield Courtney, creating a sense of security that was almost indescribable. Hayden stood at 6'2", while Courtney was only 5'4". She was petite, delicate, and whenever she saw a man as tall as Hayden, she felt intimidated. Though Austin wasn't short at 6 feet, he still felt small and less imposing compared to Hayden. I'm her husband, Austin replied, furrowing his brow as he tried to take Courtney's hand. But Courtney would rather stay hidden in Hayden's embrace than go with Austin. Courtney was scared of Hayden, but compared to him, Austin now felt even more unfamiliar and frightening to her. Husband? Hayden asked with a faint smile. As far as I know, Mr. Gilbert, your wife is the daughter of this hospital's director. Austin frowned, eyeing Hayden warily. This doesn't concern you. This is a personal matter between me and Courtney, and we'll handle it. When Hayden didn't react, Austin spoke again, his tone firm. At least for now, she's still my legal wife. Austin had already consulted with a lawyer. In situations like theirs, unless Courtney agreed to a divorce, his second marriage would be invalid. That meant they were still a couple. Courtney, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have taken your phone earlier. But you have to understand you're on your own now. If this blows up, it won't help your life. Austin turned to Courtney. We can't fight against them, they'll come after you altogether, and you'll get nothing but misery. You'll be driven crazy by the pressure. Austin, self-righteously, believed he was doing what was best for Courtney. Because Courtney had no family left, no one to stand behind her and fight with her, Austin believed she would break under the pressure once the Lewis family all united against her. Courtney tightly clung to Hayden's jacket, her head lowered as her whole body trembled. What Austin said was true, she really was alone now. Who said she's all alone? Can't you see I'm by her side? Hayden sneered, tightening his hold on Courtney. As for you, if you want to take Courtney, you'd better clean up your mess first, or you won't have the right to say anything. A black SUV stopped by the side of the road, and Tyson stepped out, his face dark with suppressed anger. Courtney, get in the car, Hayden said softly, urging her to get into Tyson's vehicle first. Courtney, Austin, anxious, stepped forward, trying to stop her. Courtney, you just returned to the country, how do you even know these people? They're clearly bad news. Come home with Mare. In Austin's eyes, the murderous aura and hostility around Hayden and Tyson were unbearable. Courtney ignored Austin, bowing her head in apology to Tyson. Tyson opened the car door himself, his face grim as he looked at Hayden. You get in too. Hayden relaxed his clenched fist. He had planned to punch Austin before leaving, but since Tyson was here, it seemed he wouldn't get the chance. Therefore, Hayden grabbed Austin by the collar. You're lucky today, but next time, you won't be so fortunate. He then shoved Austin away. Austin stumbled, barely staying on his feet, his face filled with rage as he glared at Hayden. Courtney. Courtney didn't turn around or look at Austin. She sat tensely in the car, almost pressed against the door, trying to stay as far away from Hayden as possible. You're really heartless, Courtney, Hayden sighed as he slouched back in the seat, frowning, his face pale. Clearly, he had been repressing the pain until now. He took a deep breath and seemed to be in pain, clutching at his chest. Courtney instinctively glanced at him but didn't dare come any closer. The corners of Hayden's eyes reddened with pain, looking weakly at Courtney. Courtney, why are you sitting so far away from me? Am I really that scary? Courtney nodded slightly, agreeing that he was indeed intimidating. Hayden sighed helplessly and then decided to play dead, lying down across Courtney's lap. Courtney pushed him angrily, but his chest was soaked with blood, and she feared he might blame her if she pushed him too hard, so she stopped. Hayden smirked, his voice weak. Courtney, if I die, just put my ashes in your house. Even as a ghost, I wouldn't want to leave you. Courtney shuddered, thinking this was Hayden's retaliation. She tensed up, not daring to move. Tyson shot Hayden a disgusted look. If you run away from the hospital again, we might as well go straight to the crematorium. Send gift. No wonder you're still single at this old age. With that, Hayden ignored Tyson. Tyson didn't argue with Hayden. Instead, he turned to look at Courtney. The bullet hit his body, and his collarbone shattered. Although it was a ricochet that didn't hit any vital organs, his refusal to cooperate with the treatment and constantly running away can lead to real trouble. You're a doctor, you should understand what that means, he continued. Courtney furrowed her brows, looking down at Hayden. Tyson likely realized that Courtney was the only one who could make Hayden behave. Ly surrendered. I promise I won't run away again, but you have to make sure my Courtney remained silent. She only frowned, and Hayden already wife stays safe, he said to Tyson. Courtney was angry and signed to Tyson. I'm not his wife. Tyson didn't understand, so he turned to Hayden. What did she say? She said one yes, Hayden replied with a smirk. Courtney was very upset but unable to make a sound. She could only endure his teasing. Back when they were in the terrorist organization, Hayden liked to tease her like this, knowing that she couldn't ask for help. Video, Courtney signed, asking Hayden. Did he delete your video? Hayden looked at Courtney, his expression dark. He should be beaten that bastard earlier. Courtney nodded. I saved it for you. It's not safe to keep it in your phone. Hayden reached out and took the phone from Courtney, opening it and deleting the forwarded messages in their chat. Courtney carefully watched him, impressed by how many functions modern smartphones had. It had been 5 years since she last used a smartphone, and she needed time to adjust. You want to find out who betrayed you? Hayden asked again. Courtney nodded seriously. She needed to give Mark an explanation, as well as one for herself and her parents. Investigations are the police's job. You just need to keep yourself safe, Hayden reminded her. Courtney lowered her head and remained silent. Fine, at least wait until recover, okay. Hayden spoke reluctantly. Have FO he understood Courtney. Even if he told her not to do something, she would absolutely try to do it. Since he couldn't stop her, he would back her up. This time, I found out that you're in trouble just in time. But what about next time? Hayden looked at Courtney. You can't expect me to keep running from the hospital. Courtney opened her mouth but no sound came out. She anxiously signed, you don't need to worry about me. If I don't worry about you, would you have made it this far? Hayden responded, frustrated. In South Wadon, Courtney would never have made it this far without Hayden. 0 to Hayden, Courtney was like a delicate flower in a greenhouse, unable to withstand even the slightest wind or rain. He believed she was gentle and kind, completely helpless, and he wished he could tie her to him wherever he went, but in reality, Courtney saw herself as smart, brave, and strong, like a cactus that could survive even in a desert. We have nothing between us. You don't need to worry about me. Courtney signed again, her expression irritated. I'm not helping you. It's just that my mission isn't finished. Lucas' terrorist organization has been dealt with but Lucas escaped. We've found that he has close ties with people in Hennisburg. Hayden said if we can find the person who betrayed you, we might be able to locate Lucas through them, he explained, emphasizing that this was his mission. After hearing Hayden's words, Tyson turned around, his gaze sharp and intimidating. What Hayden had just told Courtney was classified information. She's trustworthy. Besides, the higher-ups told us to find a reliable informant, though I don't want to put her in danger, Hayden retorted. The higher-ups had instructed Hayden to find a trustworthy person from the hospital to act as an informant. Hayden wasn't willing to let Courtney do this, especially considering the dangers involved. I agree. Courtney quickly signed, nervously typing a message on her phone for Tyson to see. I can cooperate and help with your investigation. Tyson glanced at Courtney but said nothing, rubbing his forehead in frustration. Take me to Moonlit Avenue. Lorraine helped me find a place to rent there. Courtney signed to Hayden. Or you could stay with me. Hayden hesitated, then stopped himself. After a moment of thought, he finally spoke. Uncle Tyson, take her low Moonlit Avenue. Courtney made a gesture of thanks. Hayden didn't speak. Only when the car stopped in an alley did he finally pull himself out of Courtney's arms. During the ride, Courtney had pushed him several times, but he just played the fool. Let me check your foot. As soon as they got out of the car, Hayden forcefully pulled Courtney into his arms. Tyson raised a hand to cover his face, as if to say he couldn't bear to watch. You're asking for trouble. This little injury won't stop me from carrying my wife. Hayden shot back at Tyson as he carried Courtney to the rental apartment. Courtney was both furious and embarrassed, struggling but unable to break free. She could only maintain a stern expression. Hayden was the most shameless man she had ever met in her life. Go away. Courtney pushed Hayden aside, limping over to find the door number and retrieving the key from beneath the flower pot, which Lorraine had prepared for her in advance. Don't hide your key in flower pots, shoes, or under the carpet. You're just giving thieves an opportunity, Hayden nagged, his talkative nature kicking in again. Courtney ignored him, unlocked the door, and walked inside. The rental apartment was an old, run-down place in Hennisburg, but its location was good, so the rent wasn't cheap. Fortunately, the room was clean and well-equipped with a fridge and everything else. This place had been found by Lorraine's husband, who said it belonged to his step-parents, and they didn't feel comfortable renting it to strangers, so they gave Courtney a discount. Courtney was very grateful. Sit still. Hayden lifted her and placed her onto the sofa, then crouched down to check Courtney's ankle, which was swollen and bruised. It was dislocated. Courtney glared at Hayden, who had no sense of personal spice. Hold on. Hayden tried to help her reset her ankle, but Courtney stopped him. She looked at him in fear, not wanting him to touch her. Hayden glanced behind Courtney. What's the meaning of that painting you've got there? Courtney instinctively turned to look. Ah! Suddenly, Hayden grabbed her ankle and reset it with a sharp motion. Courtney gasped in pain and anger, her eyes turning red and misty with tears. Hayden smiled and pulled her into his arms, comforting her. It's okay. Courtney's breathing was heavy. She angrily pushed Hayden, almost instinctively saying, Go. Hayden froze for a moment, then suddenly grabbed her shoulders, his eyes filled with excitement and disbelief. Courtney, did you just speak? Courtney was stunned for a second, then opened her mouth, trying to speak, but still couldn't make any sound. She must have talked unconsciously. Hayden was thrilled and pulled her into his arms again. Say it again. Go ahead, curse me out. Courtney's temples throbbed, and she struggled to push Hayden away. She had tried to speak, but no sound came out, as if some invisible barrier stopped her. It's okay, don't rush. Hayden noticed how anxious Courtney was and quickly tried to calm her down. He was in a good mood. Don't worry, we'll take it slow. You'll be able to speak again eventually. Courtney lowered her head, silent. Although Hayden was annoying, it seemed like he really wanted to help her. Unlike Austin, Courtney couldn't bear to think about Austin right now. Just the thought of him made it hard to breathe, and her chest hurt terribly. This place, it's a bit small, but not bad. Lorraine really cares about you. Hayden scanned the room, his eyes darting around like a radar, if afraid he might miss a spot that wasn't safe. Watching him rummage around, Courtney didn't have time to feel sad, so she could only gesture at him with her hands. What are you doing? Hayden rummaged through the drawer and grabbed the toolbox, then went to work fixing the old squeaky iron door. Courtney was a little surprised. He seemed to know how to do everything. Hayden wasn't in a hurry to leave. He walked around the bathroom, then came back and told Courtney, "Don't use the socket in there for the hairdryer. It's not separate from the wet zone, so the moisture from the shower could cause an electrical leak. It's unsafe. When I get out of the hospital, replace it with a waterproof one for you," he explained. Courtney didn't respond. She just sat on the sofa, watching Hayden. "For daily necessities, use the money I left for you," he kept saying. "Don't be reluctant to spend it. I work hard for the people above me, and while the bonuses are a bit small, there will be more later." Hayden leaned against the doorframe, continuing to talk even though Courtney didn't reply. "Men earn money to spend on their wives, right? When the comes in, I'll give it all to you to keep." Courtney was speechless, but she didn't know how to push him out of her life. Tvi asked the doctors. "They said I'll be fully recovered and ready to be discharged in 10 days. 10 days? I'm so sad," Hayden continued, trying to snuggle up to Courtney, but she pushed him away. Hayden looked disappointed, and just as he was about to cling to her again, Tyson arrived. He kicked the iron door, which Hayden had just fixed, and the door started squeaking again. "When are you going to stop with the violence?" Hayden complained helplessly, picking up the toolbox to fix the door once more, before Tyson grabbed him by the back of the neck and pulled him away. Courtney sighed in relief, thinking it would finally be quiet. But once the door closed, the silence only deepened her sense of fear and sadness. She couldn't bear to be alone. She was terrified that this overwhelming fear would consume her. She needed to find a safe place to calm down. Right now, she couldn't give up. She had to get to the bottom of the truth and help the police catch Lucas. Leaving the apartment, Courtney went to the cemetery. Courtney's parents were both only children, with very few relatives in Hennesburg. So, Austin had handled all the funeral arrangements by himself. Lorraine had asked Austin, and he said that he had buried them in Evermount Cemetery. Austin had promised to accompany Courtney, but she didn't want to with him. As soon as Courtney arrived at the cemetery, she received a call from Lorraine. "Courtney, I asked around for you. The neighborhood where your parents lived has been slated for demolition for 2 years now. Your parents had 3 old houses in Serene Cove, and the compensation was a total of $8 million, she continued. Your grandfather's old mansion was worth nearly $90 million, and it was bought by a rich businessman who had returned from overseas. However, both of these sums were settled 2 years ago, and the money was given to Austin," Lorraine added. Courtney froze for a moment. There was nearly $30 million in compensation, and Austin hadn't mentioned a word about it. Not only that, but Austin had also sold her grandfather's old mansion without her permission. She had told Austin that the mansion was the foundation of their family, and it was absolutely not for sale. Yet, after she had been missing for 5 years, Austin had eagerly liquidated it. The thought sent a chill down her spine, leaving her horrified. Send gift. Standing in the cemetery, Courtney felt a chill that seemed to penetrate her to the core. She couldn't believe that Austin had sold the old mansion. After the shock, her body started to tremble. Shock, anger, and fear all mixed together. Courtney, you need to contact a lawyer as soon as possible. You can't trust Austin. If he doesn't give you the money, that means he's cutting you off for good. Lorraine warned her. Your parents are gone, and if he wants to leave you with nothing, there's nothing you can do about it. Lorraine's voice was trembling. Tvi told my husband about this, and he's furious. His advice is for you to pretend you don't know anything, go to the housing authority and check the registration, then apply for asset preservation. To freeze Austin's assets, she continued. Don't wait until he transfers the assets. Courtney held her phone, taking a deep breath. Even if she applied for asset preservation, things would still be difficult. When her parents passed away, she was already married to Austin. As her husband, he was entitled to half of Courtney's inheritance. Courtney, knowing that Courtney couldn't speak, Lorraine's voice cracked, full of sorrow. My Courtney, why do you have to endure all of this? Courtney's eyes reddened and tears started to fall uncontrollably. She had never imagined that Austin would do this to her. She thought that once she committed to Austin, they would be together forever. Courtney, where are you? Are you at your parents' graves? Lorraine asked anxiously. Rincey stayed silent, and Lorraine grew more worried. Courtney lapped her phone twice to confirm she was at the cemetery. We'll be there soon, Lorraine said. After hanging up, Courtney numbly walked forward step by step. Austin's final gesture of respect for her parents was probably buying this plot of land for their graves. The cemetery staff led Courtney to her parents' grave site. It was in a prime location, clearly purchased at a high price. If Lorraine hadn't told her that Austin sold the Edwards family's old mansion, she might have thought that she needed to pay back Austin's lavish burial for her parents. Ow, all she felt was cold. Cold from head to toe. But now, all St. Madam, is the one who visits your parents' graves regularly your husband, the staff asked. Courtney didn't reply, her gaze lingering on the fresh flowers, still vibrant, and not yet wilted. Her vision blurred. He comes almost every week. These flowers are replaced weekly. The others only come on holidays and special occasions, the staff whispered, before turning and walking away. Standing in front of the gravestone, Courtney's vision was blurred by her tears, making everything around her seem like a nightmare. Her parents' voices and faces from 5 years ago were still vivid in her mind. Everything had been fine. However, she just had gone on a peacekeeping medical mission, and everything had changed when she came back. Dad, Mom, I'm back. Kneeling before the gravestone, Courtney gently wiped the photo on it after crying until she was exhausted. She leaned her entire body against the gravestone, seeking whatever warmth she could find. She became fully aware her parents were really gone. She was all alone now. In Hennesburg, she no longer had anyone to rely on. She remembered back in college, when Austin, as the student council president, stood out above the rest. Vera publicly confessed her feelings for him and insisted they should be together. But at that time, Courtney and Austin had already been together for 3 years. Vera was their junior, and ever since she developed feelings for Austin, she clung to him almost every day. Austin was a man of boundaries, someone who knew how to refuse and maintain distance from other women. Therefore, during that time, Courtney truly loved Austin and trusted him, believing he would never betray her. Vera had once flaunted her family background. The Lewis family was a prominent medical family in Hennesburg. Her father James, while not the hospital director at the time, had some reputation at Hennesburg General Hospital. But Courtney's background was not lacking, either. Both of Courtney's parents were the only children in their families. Courtney's grandfather was a high-ranking military officer, and her father was an official with a position higher than that of the hospital director at the time. Courtney's maternal grandmother was a professor at Hennesburg University, and her maternal grandfather had been a renowned painter. Courtney was the only child in 3 generations, and all the wealth and education of her family had been focused on her. She had been the dazzling pearl in her parents' palms, the object of envy for everyone. But now, time had passed and everything had changed. The Lewis family, who had once been too afraid to openly oppose her, was now shamelessly bullying her, knowing she had no one behind her. Once a proud, untouchable flower, she was now like a broken branch trampled into the mud. She couldn't accept it. Courtney, when Lorraine and Carl arrived, Courtney was still crying. Carl Fraley, Lorraine's husband, had been with her since high school. From boyfriend and girlfriend to husband and wife, they had been together for years. After marriage, the two of them argued almost every day, often about getting a divorce. Lorraine had applied for the peacekeeping mission to escape, to avoid her problems. But that one mission lasted 5 years. Before returning to Hennesburg, Lorraine had been anxious and fearful. She thought Carl would remarry and leave her, but he hadn't. Carl had searched for her for 5 years, never involved with any other woman. He was certain Lorraine would return. Meanwhile, Courtney, who had once been so sure that Austin would wait for her, now felt like a fool. I asked around about your family's old mansion. It was sold at a very low price, but it wasn't Austin who sold it. It was his wife, Vera, Carl said softly, standing beside Courtney. Send gift. Courtney was stumped for a moment, looking up at Carl and using sign language to ask. Vera, what right does she have to? After you disappeared, Austin applied for a death certificate. That old mansion became Austin's property. After he remarried Vera, she became his legal wife. But for her to sell the house, she would have had to get Austin's approval, Carl said. Without his consent, there's no way she could have sold it, he added. It turned out that the Edwards family's old mansion had been sold off by Austin and Vera together. That house, valued at nearly $30 million, was sold for only $1 million. They probably needed money urgently, Carl continued. Lorraine angrily cursed, those scumbags, they deserve to be struck by lightning, to never have peace. Carl tried to calm Lorraine down. Now's not the time to get angry, Courtney. If you want to minimize the damage, you'll have to rely on Austin's conscience. But divorcing him will reveal his true character. Carl didn't finish his sentence. After all, it wasn't hard to see that Austin was not the type of person who had any conscience, especially since he had remarried so quickly after Courtney's disappearance, let alone that he had a 5-year-old child with Vera. Courtney remained silent, offering no response. She never could have imagined that Austin would go so far, that he would be so ruthless. Courtney, Carl continued, you still have one way to minimize the risk. That is not to divorce Austin. Try to talk to him, talk about your feelings, or about anything, but don't divorce him for now. This way, his marriage to Vera will be invalid. If it's invalid, she won't be able to spend the money that belongs to both you and Austin. Carl suggested that Courtney not divorce Austin just yet. Staying married to that scumbag will make you miserable for the rest of your life. Lorraine clenched her fists in anger. I never thought he was that kind of person. He is not a local in Hennesburg, and he didn't pay much for the house Courtney and he bought together. Now he and that bitch lived in it. The more Lorraine thought about it, the angrier she became, her body surrucking with fury. Carl sighed. Sometimes marriage was an unsolvable problem. I'll talk to Austin. I want to see just how much he can shock me. Courtney typed, her eyes reddened. Thank you both. I handle it from here. I don't care about the rest, but the old mansion can't be sold. Oh, there's one more possibility, Carl suddenly remembered. If your parents wrote a will before they passed, and it states that all their assets go to you, that could help. Courtney, Lorraine exclaimed. Your parents loved you so much. If it really was a suicide, and they didn't know if you were alive or dead, they definitely would have written a will. The police report said it was a suicide. Courtney's breath caught as she looked at Carl. She had overlooked that. Courtney's parents were both well educated and understood the importance of a will. There was no way they would have committed suicide without leaving a will. If there was no will, it could only mean one thing: there was something suspicious about her parents' deaths. If there was no will, Courtney's parents absolutely didn't commit suicide. My grandfather's will says the old mansion belongs to me. It's under my name, and it's my premarital property, Courtney typed to tell Carl. Carl let out a relieved sigh. That's great. So Austin used your death certificate to claim your inheritance and then sell it off. Luckily for Courtney, the old mansion could be reclaimed, and Courtney's parents' inheritance could be partially recovered, even without a will. The marital house could also be reclaimed for half. Courtney. Lorraine took a deep breath, understanding the implication of Courtney's words. Even with the heavy losses, she had made up her mind to divorce Austin. Are you really going to divorce him? Isn't that just giving him and Vera an advantage? If it were me, I'd stay married to him just to piss them off, Lorraine said through her tears. But Courtney's character didn't allow her to stay in a toxic relationship. She just wanted to get away from Austin as quickly as possible. I suspect my parents' deaths weren't a suicide, Courtney typed, showing Carl her phone. My parents would never have committed suicide without seeing my body first. Absolutely not. I know them. Lice officer and a detective had his suspicions, too, but he hadn't dared to say anything to Courtney, fearing it would upset her. Carl, being a police further. The case was ruled a suicide, but I've requested the files, although it's not my case. Strangely, the people in the archives have been stalling. I have the same suspicion as you, Carl admitted, voicing his doubts that Courtney's parents had died by suicide. As a police officer, I have to suspect anyone who stands to gain, and Austin. Carl took a deep breath. You need to be prepared. If Courtney's parents were murdered, Austin would be the prime suspect. Courtney. Lorraine cried out, rushing to hold her as Courtney staggered, unable to stand. Courtney shook her head, her whole body trembling uncontrollably. Carl sighed, wanting to help Lorraine support Courtney, but Courtney, with bloodshot eyes, shook her head and weakly knelt before the once more gravestone. Her trembling fingers touched her parents' tombstone. Mom, Dad, I'm sorry. I'm such an unworthy daughter, she whispered in her heart. The sorrow and frustration in her chest became too much to bear, and Courtney suddenly coughed up blood before collapsing into unconsciousness. Courtney. Both Lorraine and Carl shouted. Send gift 0. Courtney remembered her father, who had always been her pillar of support. He had raised her in abundance, promised her a bright future, and never allowed anyone to bully her. Courtney's parents had always known that Courtney was born kind-hearted. They had given her the best education and upbringing they could have provided. Courtney's father had known her better than anyone and never tolerated anyone speaking ill of her. When Courtney insisted on marrying Austin, many of her relatives had something to say about it. Courtney's family has been a single-child lineage for 3 generations, and the relatives have grown distant over time. But when it came to the wedding, they were still informed. Those relatives, who hardly ever visited, began chattering incessantly, criticizing Austin for being from a small town, saying that he was using Courtney. They said Courtney, with her excellent background, shouldn't marry an outsider. Courtney didn't like hearing their remarks about Austin and snapped back. This led to the relatives feeling embarrassed and complaining to her parents. But Courtney's father stood firmly by her side from the beginning. Courtney, Courtney. It was Austin's voice. Austin, she's your wife. You've been together for so many years, there's genuine love between you. Those who betray true feelings will face consequences. Mark my words, Carl said. When Courtney woke up, she overheard a conversation between Carl and Austin. Lorraine had taken Courtney to the hospital and Austin had rushed over. She suffered too much in South Waydon, Lorraine said, choking back her tears. If you have any decency as a person, treat her well. I heard that she has slept with terrorists in South Waydon. Austin couldn't finish his sentence. He lowered his head before continuing. Is it true? He wanted to know if Courtney really had sold herself to terrorists to survive. Lorraine frowned, looking at Austin in disbelief. She couldn't believe that he actually asked such a question. Austin, what's wrong with you? In such a situation, shouldn't you just be thankful that your wife is alive? Austin clenched his fists tightly. So the rumors are true. Lorraine couldn't hold back anymore and slapped Austin across the face. You're such a jerk. You'd better not bring this up in front of Courtney. No matter what happened, it wasn't her choice. Even Lorraine wasn't sure whether Courtney had been involved with Hayden, but while she was with the terrorist group, it was clear that Hayden had always been protecting her. Everyone assumed Courtney was Hayden's woman. Austin's face was ashen, and he spoke in a low voice. It's not that I care, I know whatever happened wasn't her choice. Courtney lay on the hospital bed, taking a deep breath as she quietly stared at the ceiling. She finally knew what despair was. Seeing Courtney awake, Lorraine hurried to the bedside. Courtney gestured a thank you and indicated she wanted to speak with Austin alone. Lorraine nodded, bugging Courtney with visible heartache. Courtney, remember, no matter what happens, I always stand by your side. Courtney's eyes reddened as she nodded silently. After Lorraine and Carl left, Courtney and Austin were alone in the room. Austin looked at Courtney nervously before breaking the silence with a question. Courtney, who were those two? They clearly don't look like good people. How do you know them? How could you just go with them so easily? You were never like this before. His words, layered with implication, seemed to suggest that Courtney had changed. Courtney's gaze burned into Austin. Who told you that? She typed the question on her phone, demanding to know who had spread those slanderous rumors about her. Austin looked down, avoiding her eyes. Courtney, did you hear everything? I believe you didn't do it willingly. In that situation, there was probably no choice, was it, Vera? Courtney's anger flared as she typed furiously. Austin's silence spoke volumes, confirming her suspicion. So you believed her? Courtney's entire body trembled as she questioned him. Austin remained silent. His expression made it clear deep down, he no longer saw Courtney as pure. Austin, let's get a divorce. Courtney's fingers shook as she typed out each word deliberately. She finally made up her mind to divorce him. In the future, they would be strangers. And if her parents' deaths were somehow tied to him, they would be enemies. No, Courtney, I won't agree to a divorce. Austin's emotions spilled over, his reaction bordering on desperation as he refused to accept a divorce. And what about Vera? Courtney demanded, typing on her phone. Courtney, I just can't decide. She gave me a daughter. I have to think about Foch, Austin replied, visibly torn. He wouldn't agree to divorce Courtney, nor would he leave Vera. The hypocrisy was palpable. I have proof she cheated in South Wyden. She slept with terrorists for 5 years to survive, even pretending to be one terrorist's wife. The sudden outburst came from the doorway, where Vera had stormed in, her voice dripping with fury. Vera charged into the room. Courtney glared at Vera, her fists clenching tightly. What are you doing here? Austin frowned, irritation clear in his tone. Go back. Why should I back? I'm your wife, Vera snapped, stepping closer to Courtney's bed. Courtney, I've always thought it was strange that you managed to survive in South Waydon. Turns out, you sold your body to make it out alive. Courtney's gaze bore into Vera. How she wished she could speak right now, to curse at her with the same ferocity as Lorraine had earlier. But she couldn't make a sound, forced to watch Vera's smugness without the ability to retaliate. Shut up, Austin interrupted, his voice filled with reluctance. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to think about whether someone else had touched Courtney, let alone accept the possibility. Jeffrey said Courtney survived because, as soon as she arrived, she caught the eye of the second in command of the terrorist group. Vera continued, her tone sharp and deliberate. That man, who was also from Hennesburg, was involved in smuggling operations. He was always with the organization's leader, Lucas. He took Courtney as his own, she said. For 5 years, she stayed with him, sleeping with him just to stay alive. Vera enunciated each word with precision, ensuring Austin felt the full weight of her accusation. Austin, she's been filthy for a long time. She's spent 5 years with a terrorist. Who knows how many times she's been violated by him. And Jeffrey also said, Vera added, her tone dripping with malicious satisfaction, that the man and Courtney referred to each other as husband and wife. Whenever they went, he introduced her as his wife. Courtney's body trembled uncontrollably as she stared at Austin, who said nothing, but his silence was louder than any words. It was clear that he believed Vera. Courtney, is what she said. Truck. Austin's voice was hoarse as he finally asked, his eyes red with emotion. I just need one word from you. Is it true? Tell me. His tone was almost pleading, as if he would rather hear a B than face the truth. Courtney felt a chill spread through her entire body, a bitter senile curling her lips. She found him utterly ridiculous. What right do you have to ask me if it's true? Courtney signed angrily with her hands. Austin, already on edge, grew more agitated. He didn't understand sign language, and his frustration boiled over. Courtney, answer me. Just type the words answer me. Courtney remained motionless, quiet as a statue. Austin quickly realized his tone had been too harsh and in his panic, tried to comfort her. In front of Vera, he embraced Courtney tightly. Courtney, I didn't mean to sound harsh. I know no matter what happened, it wasn't your choice, right? Austin, how long are you going to delude yourself? Vera's cold voice cut in. Those people over there are filthy. Do you even know if she's carrying some kind of disease? You hadn't touched her for all those years you've been together, yet she had slept with someone else for 5 years, she sneered, mocking Austin for treating a filthy woman like Courtney as someone precious. Shut up. Get lost. Austin's pride flared, unable to tolerate the insult to his dignity. He pointed toward the door, demanding Vera leave. Vera clenched her fists tightly, her eyes burning with resentment as she glared at Courtney. You're disgusting. Courtney, with those venomous words, Vera stormed out. Courtney sat motionlessly on the hospital bed, a lifeless shell of herself. Austin wrapped his arms around her tightly. Courtney, tell me it's not true. Please, I'm begging you. Courtney remained unresponsive, her face pale and expressionless, until the 4 needle in her hand started to backflow with blood. Finally, she silently reached out and pulled it out herself. Till take you home. Austin stopped asking questions, instead taking her hand and preparing to leave the hospital with her. Courtney pulled her hand back, but Austin stubbornly grabbed it again, unwilling to let go. Courtney knew deep down that Austin was no longer the man he was 5 years ago, and she was no longer the same Courtney. What they both longed for was the version of each other from 5 years ago, a version that no longer existed. Courtney, don't let Vera's words get in you. I know you're not like that. Austin tried to console her, seemingly as much for himself as for her. Courtney didn't respond, her expression numb as she walked forward. Blood continued to drip from her hand where she had pulled the drops leaving a faint trail behind her. It wasn't until they reached the parking lot that Austin noticed the blood. Panicked, he pressed against the needle wound to stop the bleeding, his eyes reddening with worry. Courtney, he called her name over and over, but the emptiness in her gaze made him uneasy, almost afraid. Courtney pulled out her phone and typed a question. Did you let Vera sell the old mansion my grandfather left me? Austin froze, his expression betraying his guilt as he looked at her nervously. Courtney, how did you find out? Courtney continued typing. We'll talk about the compensation later. The old mansion is the Edwards family's foundation, our ancestral home. It cannot be sold. Austin's eyes darted nervously, and he stammered. Courtney, Vera's family's company ran into some trouble 2 years ago. They had cash flow issues, and she begged me for help. I thought it was better to help them out. It was my house. How could your? Courtney's fingers trembled as she typed her furious question. Courtney, we're married. At the time, I thought you were gone. That house was something you left behind for me, so of course, I could handle it however I thought was best. Austin explained anxiously. Send gift. He admitted it. He admitted that he had been fully aware of what was happening. So you let Vera sell the old mansion at a price below market value. Courtney's entire body trembled as she typed. Austin, I'm giving you a chance. Buy that house back for me. Don't care how you do it, but don't push me. I don't want this to escalate to the point where we face each other in court. She typed quickly, and each word she typed felt like it was bleeding from her heart. Austin clenched his fists tightly, staring at Courtney in shock. Courtney, how did you turn into this? Am I really less important to you than that house, than money? Courtney couldn't help but flash a bitter smile, her gaze filled with a mixture of exhaustion and disdain. Austin was like a stranger to her now. I want the house, Courtney ripped again, her message unwavering. Time. Austin snapped. Give me some time. I'll negotiate for it. He opened the car door, gesturing for her to get in. But Courtney turned away, refusing to get in his car. However, Austin quickly grabbed her wrist. Courtney, can you just listen to me for once? Taking a deep breath, Courtney relented and got into the back seat. She refused to sit in the front at passenger SSPAL, the wife's seat. Sticker Vera had deliberately placed there was a clear provocation, a blatant reminder of her presence. Austin froze in place for a moment, his eyes landing on the sticker. His frustration boiled over as he frantically tried to peel it off. But even after it was removed, the mark remained. Just like their relationship, a scar that couldn't be erased. Building. Courtney, see, can we ever go back to the way we were? Austin asked softly as the car came to a stop outside her apartment. Courtney found the question laughable. He had remarried, had a child, there was no way they could go back together. She got out of the car and walked upstairs without a word. Austin followed close behind, trailing her like a shadow. Ms. Edwards? This is a delivery from Mr. Reed. He ordered some fruit and meals for you. He was worried you might not be eating properly. As Courtney reached the door, she was stunned to see 3 or 4 delivery couriers waiting for her. Courtney froze, staring in disbelief. There were workers carrying bags of fruit, daily necessities, freshly washed bedding sets, and even high-end clothing delivered straight from a boutique. She looked at the items, all of which were expensive. She thought to herself that Hayden was truly crazy. He was just an ordinary police officer who had risked his life working undercover for meager bonuses, yet he spent so much money on her. Courtney gestured nervously, asking the workers, "Can I return this?" But they didn't understand her sign language and simply smiled as they carried everything into her apartment. Austin stood behind her, his face dark and tense. "Who is it?" Austin asked in a low voice after the delivery workers left. "I'm asking you, who sent you these?" Courtney didn't respond. "Courtney." Austin's frustration flared. "A friend," Courtney typed. "A friend? That guy?" Austin grabbed her wrist, oblivious to how much it had hurt her. "Courtney, do you have any idea how expensive these clothes are? And the fact that they delivered, that's a service reserved for high-end VIPs of this brand," he said. "What kind of friend is so attentive to you? And how come I never knew you had such wealthy connections in Hennesburg?" Austin questioned her. His tone grew accusatory, as if he'd already decided she was the kind of woman who sold her body. Courtney's breathing quickened as she yanked her hand free, glaring at him with caution. Austin rubbed his temples, realizing how often he'd been losing control around Courtney lately. But he convinced himself that it was because he cared about her. "Courtney, I'm sorry," he apologized again. To Courtney, the man standing before her felt frighteningly unfamiliar. "Courtney, return these clothes and he'll take you shopping instead, okay? Whatever you want, I'll get it for you. Don't take things from others, they only approach you with ulterior motives," he said. "I'm the one who truly loves you. I cherish you so much that I couldn't even bring myself to touch you." Austin's voice trembled, raw and hoarse. He inly had cherished her once. He'd thought saving intimacy for marriage was the right way to honor her. But then, after they got married, they left to join the peacekeeping medical team. Courtney recoiled, forcefully pushing Austin away. To Austin, it felt like she was trying to escape him, to distance herself. His emotions spiraled out of control, and he grabbed her by the head. Pressing his lips to hers, "Courtney, you're mine. You're my wife." "Why?" Courtney lost control and slapped him, her breathing uneven. Austin's eyes turned red as he yanked her arm, forcing her down onto the sofa. "Courtney, you're my wife. Why do you let others touch you but reject me like this?" He reached for her clothes, his actions driven by a twisted need to vent his emotions. Courtney's entire body shook as she struggled desperately, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't the Austin she once knew. This man before her was utterly terrifying. "Don't touch me." Courtney sobbed through sign language. But Austin seemed like he'd lost his mind. "Courtney, I don't believe what they say about you. You haven't let anyone else touch you, right? You're still my Courtney, aren't you? Please, give yourself to me." He begged her as if believing that sleeping with her once would reveal the truth, whether she had been touched by another man. If she hadn't, then this time would be her first. "Send gift." Courtney's breathing grew rapid as she stared at Austin, frantically pushing and hitting him, but it was futile. In her struggle, she fell off the sofa, shattering a glass on the floor. Grabbing a shard, she pressed it against her neck with force. Dark red blood began to seep from the wound. Austin froze in place, his entire body rigid as he stared at Courtney. Slowly, he slumped to the ground, overwhelmed. At that moment, he finally calmed down. While Courtney's body was tense, her gaze full of hostility as she stared at Austin. She cautiously backed away until she was huddled in a corner. Austin sat on the floor for what felt like an eternity before angrily slapping himself across the face. "Courtney, I just care about you so much. I feel like I'm losing my mind. From the moment I found out you were alive, that you'd come back. I've been on the edge. I feel like I'm going insane," he said. "Every day I'm caught between the joy of your return, the pain of what we've lost, and this constant fear of losing you again. I love you so much. Courtney," he pulled at his hair. "Courtney, what am I supposed to do? Tell me." Courtney's body remained rigid as she stared at Austin. She knew that he wasn't really that sad, he was just being greedy. He wanted her, his first love, but he also wanted Vera and their child. But life didn't hand out such perfect opportunities. Courtney, give me a month. I'll handle the issue with the Edwards family's old mansion. I promise to give you an answer, Austin said as he slowly got to his feet, taking a cautious step toward her. But Courtney recoiled like a frightened deer, her eyes wary and filled with hatred. The moment he approached, she pressed the shard deeper into her skin. Austin froze, his heart aching as he stepped back. Courtney, don't hurt yourself. I'm sorry. It's all my fault. I'll leave right now, okay? Just put it down, please. He backed away slowly, step by step, until he reached the door. Courtney, I'll come see tomorrow. Courtney didn't respond. It wasn't until Austin left that her hands dropped limply to her sides, exhaustion overtaking her. Blood trickled from her neck, soaking into her t-shirt. She felt drained, her entire body ached, throbbing with pain. Curling into herself, Courtney hugged her knees and cried silently. She was so exhausted. Curling up in the comber, Courtney drifted into unconsciousness. It wasn't until the next morning that she slowly woke up. The blood on her wound head dried, but her entire body felt like it was falling apart. She was ill, her head pounded, a fever burning through her. Dizzy and weak, she staggered to her feet, only to collapse onto the sofa. Her breathing grew labored, her chest heaving with a heat that felt suffocating at that moment. The crushing weight of loneliness consumed her, as though she had fallen into an icy abyss. Her heart ached, as if it were being torn apart for reasons she couldn't explain. Her thoughts drifted to Hayden. For the first time, she realized that having someone who talked too much wasn't so bad after all. Hayden always liked to taunt her, and she was afraid of him. But his existence had always made her feel undeniably alive. Her phone buzzed suddenly, interrupting her thoughts. The caller was Lorraine. Courtney, did you check the group chat or the forum? Lorraine's voice was frantic. Courtney didn't respond. Courtney, whatever you do, don't check the forum. Don't check anything. Listen to me, I've already asked Carl to report this to the police. They'll handle the slander and rumors. She went on. Just promise me you won't check it, Lorraine urged repeatedly, clearly terrified that Courtney might see it and spiral further. Courtney's fingers trembled, and a chill spread through her body after ending the call. Her shaky hands unlocked her phone, and she opened the Hennisburg General Hospital forum. Her heart plummeted as she saw the explosive posts about her, rumors spreading like wildfire. The accusations were cruel and vile. Someone claimed Courtney had sold her body in South Weldon, submitted to terrorists, been defiled, and lived as the wife of a terrorist. Some even branded her a traitor who didn't deserve to live. There was no need to guess who had started these rumors. It had to be one of the people who had returned with her. Courtney had sacrificed so much to ensure their survival, to bring them back alive to Hennisburg. And yet, human nature was proving to be more terrifying than anything she had faced in South Weldon. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the caller was Robert. Courtney, it's Jeffrey. Robert's voice was filled with anger as he spoke. He explained that Jeffrey Anderson had spread all these malicious rumors. I'll ask him about this. Don't worry, I'll make him apologize to you, Robert assured her. But Courtney couldn't respond. Her fingers trembled as she clutched her hair. Her family was gone, her love had betrayed her, and now even her comrades, those who had shared life and death with her, had turned their backs on her. Cantillas about Courtney being abducted and forced to marry a terrorist in South Weldon were spreading like General Hospital wildfire throughout Hennisburg. Vera, wary of escalating the situation and tarnishing her father's reputation as the hospital director or damaging the hospital's image, resorted to discreet personal attacks against Courtney within the hospital. Lent even imagine how filthy this Courtney must be. How could she sleep with those terrorists? It's horrifying, someone sighed. Exactly. I didn't expect her to do so because she looks so innocent. I'd rather die than stoop so low just to survive, another chimed in. Es so beautiful, though. If I were a terrorist, I'd want her too, Sign added with a mocking laugh. The entire hospital was abuzz with gossip about Courtney. None of them had lived through what Currency and her team had endured. To them, her 5 years of trauma and survival were nothing more than a juicy story to ridicule. The sound of a tray crashing to the floor shattered the noise in the cafeteria. Lorraine, trembling cereal directly onto one of the gossipers' heads. What's wrong with you? Lorraine screamed at them. With anger, lost control, and threw her bowl of, but it was impossible for her to fight against the sheer number of people spreading the rumors. For them, the truth didn't matter. What mattered was their entertainment. Are you insane? The man sneered, wiping the cereal off his face. You're defending Courtney so hersely. What, did you have someone keeping you company there too? A punch landed squarely on the man's face. It was Jay Houston, one of the team members who had been in South Weldon, and also Mark's cousin. Say that again, and I swear I'll kill you. Try me. Jay's voice was hoarse, his hand trembling with barely restrained fury, veins bulging on his knuckles. His rage was palpable. They were comrades who came back from hell together, so they wouldn't let anyone demean each other. What PTSD got you all violent now? Did you even pass your psych evaluations working here? The men said people like you, with trauma, shouldn't even be the men who had been punched didn't dare fight back but resorted to taunts, calling for them to be kicked out of the hospital. Exactly. Why do they get promotions and raises after being away for 5 years? We work so hard here and don't see a dime more. Others chimed in, their voices dripping with envy and resentment, and they still have the audacity to demand compensation. Most of the complaints stemmed from jealousy. These onlookers only saw Jay and his comrades receiving recognition and rewards from the hospital. They couldn't comprehend what those 5 years in a war zone had cost them. You want the money? Fine. I give it to you. Jay's voice cracked as he shouted, his bloodshot eyes glaring at the crowd. But can you die in Mark's place? Mark was dead. He had been such an extraordinary young doctor, even surpassing Austin in many ways. He had been Robert's favorite student. The mention of Mark's name brought an uneasy silence over the crowd, their fleeting shame momentarily stilling their tongues. We didn't mean to target you. We know you've been through a lot. But that Courtney, who slept with terrorists to survive, doesn't have any standards. Someone tried to redirect the anger. Bullshit, Jay pointed at the person. Do you know the truth? Did you see it with your own eyes? You're spreading rumors. Why said, how could it not be true? The person retorted, it's what Jeffrey's. Jay clenched his fists and glanced at Jeffrey Anderson, who was looking down, trying to escape. Aren't you going to explain yourself? Jay stepped forward and grabbed him by the collar. Didn't lie. Jeffrey muttered, his head still bowed. Jeffrey was timid, the weakest of the men, driven by self-interest. It was clear that Vera had used some form of temptation to manipulate him. Jeffrey, how could you do this? Without Courtney, none of us would have come back alive. She sacrificed so much for us, and this is what you're doing. Spreading lies. Lorraine's voice shook with anger. Jeffrey stayed silent, head lowered. He's not lying. You all know the truth, Vera said as she strutted over, holding a tray, her voice dripping with arrogance. If Courtney was innocent, why doesn't she come out and clear things up herself? Hiding like a coward. She's guilty, isn't she? Vera, Courtney has never willingly done anything dirty or disgraceful. She's more innocent than your. Lorraine glared at Vera, furious. Vera chuckled. There's no real difference between unwillingly being violated and willingly being someone's bed partner. The fact is, Courtney is a slut. Your. Lorraine was about to lash out, but Robert stepped in and stopped her. Robert, now older and frailer due to the 5 years he spent in the war, looked significantly more worn. He held Lorraine back and turned to Vera. Vera, there's no need for such hostility. We're all doctors here, our job is to save lives. Then, he turned to Jeffrey. If you still have a conscience, go to the forum and clear things up. Apologize to Courtney in person. Jeffrey instinctively glanced at Vera. No matter what she promised you, you can't lose your conscience. Even if you one day become the director, if you've lost your conscience, you'll never have peace in the rest of your life. Robert pointed at Jeffrey angrily. Mr. Anderson, everything Jeffrey said is the truth. Courtney really did sleep with terrorists for 5 years. You can't argue with that, can you? Vera sneered, deliberately looking at Austin, who was approaching from a distance. What's her excuse for acting all high and mighty? How dare she criticize Austin for remarrying? She scoffed. At the entrance of the cafeteria, Courtney stood silently. Her neck injury had been treated and bandaged, but her face remained deathly pale. Austin's face darkened as he slammed the tray onto the table and glared at Vera. Are you done yet? Austin, I'm your wife. Why are you always defending that filthy slut? Vera shot back angrily. Austin raised his hand and struck Vera across the face in front of everyone in the hospital. Vera covered her face, shocked as she stared at Austin. Austin, leave, you lost your mind. You hit me in front of all these people. Austin bit his temples, his frustration reaching its peak. He truly felt like he was losing his mind. Austin, you'll regret this. Vera threatened, then furiously threw all the plates on the table to the ground before storming off. A few steps away, she saw Courtney. You bitch, why are you still alive? If Courtney had died, none of this trouble would have followed. If Courtney had died, her entire estate would belong to Austin, with Courtney's house and the compensation. She and Austin could live a happy life. But Courtney had come back alive. Vera glared at Courtney with hatred. Courtney looked back at Vera, her gaze unafraid. She wasn't scared of Vera, although Vera was despicable. She wasn't sammered. I am Austin's wife. If I don't divorce him, your marriage means nothing. Your daughter will remain a bastard child. Courtney looked out her phone, typed, and played the owl voice at maximum volume. This was something Hayden had taught her on WhatsApp. Even if you slander me, trying every way to ruin me, it won't change the fact that I'm Austin's wife. FM back and you're scared, which is why you're here spreading rumors to cover up the fact that you're his mistress, she continued. Courtney held her phone, blasting the voice at full volume. The robotic tone of the voice was emotionless, yet it perfectly mocked Vera's true intentions. Everyone in the room turned to look at Courtney. Vera stared at Courtney, still seething, and was about to continue provoking her when Courtney, ahead of her, had already played the owl voice. I've been missing for 5 years. I've been with Austin for 10 years. It was only 2 years ago that Austin applied for my death certificate and married you, but your child is already 5 years old. This means that before I left Hennesburg during my relationship with Austin, you two were already together. What right do you have to slander me? Courtney stood there, stiff with anger, glaring or Vera. She was fighting back. She wasn't someone who didn't know how to fight back. Now, she had nothing to fear. Even if Vera's family held power, even if they were influential, she didn't care anymore. Austin nervously watched Courtney, quickly running toward her, trying to take her phone away to stop her from speaking. Courtney shot him a warning glance and swiftly stepped back. Jay, Lorraine, and Robert rushed over, standing protectively in front of Courtney. It's true. Austin and Vera's daughter is already 5 years old. They've booked up for a long time. They must have wanted Courtney to die out there. Exactly. Vera is spreading rumors about Courtney to cover up the fact that she sabotaged Courtney's marriage. In the cafeteria, a small group of people began to change their tune. Vera's face turned pale. She wanted to argue, but with the child's age being so clear, she didn't know what to say. Courtney, just wait and see, she hissed, gritting her teeth, before storming off. She had always wished Courtney had died. Now, she wanted her dead more than ever. Courtney. Austin urgently tried to explain. Courtney, listen to me, it's her. She spiked my drink. Austin, you don't deserve her. Jay shot him an angry look. Austin wasn't even 1/10 as good to Courtney as Mark had been. Austin furrowed his brow, looking at Jay, then back at Courtney. Courtney, let me take you back. We can. No need. Courtney turned up the volume on her phone and didn't acknowledge Austin as she walked over to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, I don't think I've ever done anything wrong to you. So why are you slandering me? Courtney asked him directly, looking at him. Since he had done this, there was no reason to hold back. Over the years, she had done enough to make Hayden protect everyone, to ensure no one else had to sacrifice. She had lived in constant fear, staying close to Hayden, enduring his threats and taunting. Jeffrey lowered his head in shame, his hands tightly clenched, unsure how to face Courtney. Jeffrey, you've really disappointed me. Robert sighed, shaking his head. Jeffrey was his youngest son. Dad, Jeffrey gripped his hands tighter. The hospital forced you into retirement because of your age and health, but their family had no real power. Jeffrey had been forced by Vera's threats to say things that would harm Courtney, all to protect his family. We're just ordinary people, we have no power. Jeffrey's voice trembled. During the 5 years they had been away, Hennesburg had changed drastically. The Lewis family now controlled the hospital with an iron grip. Look at the situation now. You've been gone for 5 years and couldn't even get into that position. Now it belongs to the Lewis family. Do you think we still have a place here in the hospital? Jeffrey started to cry. You ever wondered why the Lewis family is so dead? The Lewis family, and Hennesburg's top family, the Reed family, are in an alliance. Have arrogant, he went on. You think I'm afraid of the Lewis family? No, I'm afraid of the Reed family behind them. If the Reed family wants us gone, they'll crush us like and he raised his voice. What Jeffrey said was the truth. The Reed family was the most powerful family in Hennesburg. The Reed Group was a century-old enterprise, and Warren Reed was a big shot in Hennesburg. I understand. Courtney typed to Robert. Don't blame him, she didn't care about the rumors anymore. What mattered now was finding out the truth about her parents' deaths and uncovering the traitor. Courtney. Robert sighed, his heart heavy with sympathy. Courtney shook her head and turned to leave. Courtney. Austin chased after her and grabbed her hand. Courtney, I was the asshole yesterday. Courtney yanked her hand away from Austin. Give me back the old mansion. Austin looked at Courtney's phone, his brow furrowing. I told you to give me some time. He was always asking for time. 10 years ago, Austin had won Courtney's heart step by step with his purity and sincerity, slowly stepping into her world. Now, he was slowly erasing himself from Courtney's heart, step by step. I'll give you time. Courtney typed. 1 month. Austin took a deep breath, frustrated, and thumped his head with his hand. The hospital refused to let Courtney return, delaying her reappointment with the excuse that she was ill and unable to speak. Courtney knew that without the ability to communicate, it would be difficult for her to interact with parents, but she still had to make a living. Lorraine had paid her rent, and she needed to repay her, as well as support herself. She hadn't used the $20,000 from Hayden. Courtney found a job at a pharmacy where she spent her days in the store, handing out medicine, and then returned to her rented apartment after work to avoid interacting with people. She not only developed aphasia, but also began to suffer from severe social anxiety. She became afraid of contact with others. She felt that everyone was manipulative and complicated. Courtney, let's talk. Perhaps because Austin had been unwilling to divorce her, Vera, growing impatient, came to find her personally. Courtney ignored her. Courtney, don't be so stubborn. If you don't cooperate, I'll make you lose this job tomorrow, Vera threatened. This is your part of the money for the wedding house, $1 million. I won't keep a penny, but you have to change the ownership of the house to my name. She took out a card. Seeing that Courtney remained silent, Vera spoke again. I suggest you divorce Austin as soon as possible. There's $2 million on this card. I've given you enough. Don't be shameless. She presented another card with $2 million on it. The Riverside house had been bought for over $2 million, with her family contributing $1 billion, and Austin's family contributing $1,000, and the remaining loan was being paid by Austin. But that house was marital property. 5 years had passed, and the property had appreciated in value. Yet Vera actually had the audacity to only give her $1 million. Courtney Edwards. Vera shouted angrily. Courtney's silence enraged her. Courtney picked up the dirty water from a cloth she had been washing and splashed it at Vera. Vera screamed as she ran out. Courtney, this is the last time I'm asking you. Next time, I won't be so polite. Think carefully. Courtney threw the 2 cards on the ground. Vera gritted her teeth, turning to her assistant. Get a few people to teach her a lesson. Do it cleanly and don't let Austin find out. The assistant quickly nodded. Don't worry, Ms. Lewis. I'll make sure she can't stay in Hennesburg. No one is allowed to provoke the Lewis family, Vera sneered. If she refuses to compromise, make her life miserable every day. Let's see how long she can last. Courtney was working the night shift at the pharmacy until midnight. Just as she was about to leave, a few drunk young thugs approached. Hey, little lady, I hear you're pretty tough, huh? One of them smirked as he stepped forward, looking to cause trouble. I think you guys are pretty tough too. A lazy, deep voice from the doorway came. Hayden was leaning against the pressure. The thugs froze for a moment, glancing at each other. Didn't they say she's alone? One of them whispered. Let's go. She won't always be this lucky, another muttered, quickly retreating car, exuding an air of innocence. Courtney let out a sigh of relief and gestured toward Hayden with sign language. You discharged from the hospital. They had agreed on a 10-day discharge and he was only on day 8. I was worried about you, Hayden replied, teasing her with a straight face. Courtney lowered her head, locked the pharmacy door, and walked toward the alley, ignoring Hayden. She was used to it. Courtney. You're heartless. Hayden laughed and chased after her, pulling a bouquet of flowers from behind his hack. In a cheesy tour, he said, a Leela gift from my discharge ceremony. Do you like it? Put it in a vase at home. Courtney looked at the flowers, thinking it would be a waste to throw them away, so she reluctantly took them. Just as she accepted the bouquet, she spotted Austin standing downstairs at her apartment, his face filled with anger. Austin glared at Courtney, angrily snatching the flowers from her hands. Courtney, who is he? It's none of your business. Courtney signed to Austin. But Austin couldn't understand. Courtney, what happened to you? This guy is clearly troublesome. Come home with me. He pulled Courtney aside, insisting she go back with him. Vera took Phoebe and left. Please come home with me, Austin said in a soft voice, trying to comfort her, as he reached up to smooth Courtney's hair. Courtney instinctively pulled away, reaching for the flowers in Austin's hand. Austin, frustrated and clearly threatened, seemed to fear that Courtney would fall for someone else. There was a deep possessiveness in him. She Courtney as his and his alone. Courtney, if you want flowers, I can buy you some. You're my wife, understand? Austin's voice was low, his anger barely contained. Can I hit him? Hayden frowned, clearly losing patience. He reached out, grabbing Courtney by the collar and pulling her into his arms, shooting a warning glance at Austin. Austin, equally angry, tensed, and for a moment, it seemed like a fight might break out. Don't fight, Courtney warned Hayden, then turned to look at Austin. Go away. Austin furrowed his brows. Courtney, who is he? He still couldn't understand Courtney's sign language, but he refused to make the effort to learn. My Courtney gave a powerless smile, then took Hayden's hand, and used her phone to speak. You can have Vera, and I can find another guy. This is boyfriend. Eyebrow. Did you? Hayden blinked, momentarily surprised. He looked down at Courtney, fully aware she was using him. Yes, still proudly raised an E here that I'm her man. Now get lost. Austin, enraged, clenched his fists. Courtney, even if you're mad at me, there's no need to provoke me like this. You're overthinking it. Courtney gripped her phone, feeling irritated. And tell Vera that I'll divorce you. When you give me back the old mansion, we'll go file for the divorce. Tell her to stop harassing me. Austin looked at her, panic creeping into his voice. She came to see you. Courtney ignored Austin and pulled Hayden upstairs. Courtney, he tried to catch up, but Hayden gave him a warning look, not wanting to escalate things physically with Hayden. Austin could only follow behind. Courtney, I know you're mad at me. I promise I'll fix everything. I know what kind of person you are. You can make a scene if you want, but let's not get a divorce, okay? He sounded like he was pleading, desperate not to lose Courtney. Courtney, we'll go back to how things were. Don't make me do this on my own, please, Austin begged, hoping she would understand and cooperate. He was tired of not being understood. Courtney's fingers were numb as she reached for the door. She didn't turn around because she knew things would never go back to the way they were. This ex-husband of yours talks too much, it's getting annoying. Hayden sighed, kicking Austin in the chest. His strength was immense. Having been a peacekeeper, Hayden exuded a tough, rebellious aura, one that made it clear Austin, who had always been an obedient scholar, was no match for him. Dude, I'm telling you, if you want to win her back, at least get rid of the mess around you. You're not sincere, Hayden said, grabbing Austin by the collar. You need to make a choice, you know. You're making me jealous. You know why I'm jealous of a scumbag like you? Because you somehow managed to marry Courtney 5 years ago. Hayden's punch landed squarely on Austin's face. He'd wanted to hit Austin for a long time. Hayden. Courtney rushed forward, shoving Hayden away, signing angrily. You get lost, too. Hayden frowned, clearly hurt. What gives you the right to interfere in our matters? Austin tried to strike back, but Courtney blocked him. She's my wife. You're nothing. Hayden's cold aura intensified, his fists clenched as though he was ready to go after Austin again. Courtney frantically signed, but Hayden, in his anger, refused to look at her, fixated only on taking another swing at Austin. Finally, unable to take it anymore, Courtney raised her hand and slapped Hayden across the face. Hayden froze, his eyes burning with a mixture of confusion and hurt as he looked at her. This wasn't the first time Courtney had hit him. She'd done it before, but Hayden was thick-skinned and never showed any signs of being hurt. But this time, the pain in his eyes was impossible to ignore. Courtney stood there, stunned, unsure if she'd slapped him out of habit. She just didn't want Hayden to hurt Austin too badly, and she was worried Austin might call the police. Hayden stood still for a few seconds, silent. He didn't say anything and turned to leave. Courtney wanted to call out to him, but no sound came. In the end, she just gave up. Austin was somewhat happy despite being punched. Even though he was in pain, seeing that Courtney still cared about him made him forget the discomfort. Courtney, you still care about me, don't you? That man clearly is bad news, he said. Don't have anything to do with him. If he bothers you, I'll call the police. Courtney pointed toward the stairs, signaling for Austin to leave. Austin stepped forward, attempting to hug Courtney, but she pushed him away with force. Courtney's gaze was firm as she pointed at the stairs again. Austin hesitated, not daring to move closer. Courtney, I often dream of you. I believe you'll come back. And now, you're really here. Courtney's gaze flickered and tears gathered in her eyes. Courtney, I wish this was all just a nightmare. When I wake up, we'll still be there for each other just like before. Austin whispered. Courtney's fingers trembled. She wished this was a dream too, an awful nightmare that would end when she woke up. She longed for the day when she could wake up and her parents would still be there. Austin would still be the same Austin. Courtney, let's go back to how we were, okay? Austin stepped closer, slowly pulling Courtney into his arms, holding her tighter. Courtney, really, truly love you, before Austin could continue, Courtney pushed him away, with all her strength. Her emotions were spiraling out of control. She pointed toward the stairs, glaring at Austin in anger. She wanted him to leave and never show again. Up Austin, anxious, tried to calm Courtney, but seeing how upset she was, he could only slowly bark away. Courtney, don't be upset. I'll go. I'll leave now, and when you've calmed down, I'll come back to talk to you. Austin's eyes were also red as he turned to walk away, but then he looked back at Courtney. Courtney, I'm sorry. He said he was sorry. But he had done so many things to hurt Courtney. One apology couldn't fix it. Austin left. Courtney stood at the door, motionless for a long time. She felt as though she had fallen back into the abyss, trapped in a nightmare, suffocating in pain. The floor was scattered with the flowers Hayden had brought, petals fallen, the flowers already wilting. Tears fell to the ground. Courtney crouched down, picking up the flowers and carefully bringing them home. She her best to save every single bloom. She pitied and mourned for the flowers, while also desperately trying to save the shattered version of herself. Courtney loved flowers, but after being trapped in South Wadon, she rarely saw them. Later, Hayden always found ways to bring her flowers. Sometimes wildflowers, sometimes roses. Courtney would carefully place them in a vase, guarding the burst of color in the dry, stuffy air. For these 5 years, the place Austin held in Courtney's heart was what had kept her going. Unwrapped them, but the flowers and little surprises from Hayden were also one of the reasons her mental world hadn't completely collapsed. Sitting on the couch, Courtney stared at the flowers she had placed in the vase for a long time. It was already 2 a.m. When she threw the wrapping of the blowers into the trash and was about to step outside, she saw a lone figure sitting helplessly by the door. He was such a tall man, sitting there like a large dog abandoned by its owner, looking pitiful and wrong. Courtney froze for a moment, looking at Hayden. He had been asleep, but upon hearing the noise, he looked up, gazing at Courtney, innocent and longing expression. "Courtney, apologize to me," Hayden said, his first words demanding an apology from her. He didn't mind being beaten by Courtney. He was so tough and strong that she couldn't hurt him. But today, she had hit him because of Austin, a total jerk. Hayden was upset by that. Courtney looked at Hayden and, after a long silence, raised her hand and made an apologetic gesture. Hayden, seeing she had given in, snorted. "I have nowhere to go. You don't have a home." Courtney frowned and asked, clearly seeing that Hayden was pretending to be why. With Hayden lowered his gaze, his voice hoarse. "If one had a home, do you think they'd send me to such a dangerous place as an undercover agent?" 5 years. Courtney froze, a wave of guilt rushing over her, and she quickly apologized. "I'm sorry." Hayden quickly stood up, grabbing Courtney's gesturing hand. "I've been wounded. Tyson kicked me out of the peacekeeping unit. My situation's special, and I can't go back. I don't even have a job now." "Courtney, I got shot to protect you, and you owe me," he added. Courtney froze, her whole body tensing. It was true that Hayden had been shot while protecting her. At that moment when the bullet came, Hayden had shielded her. But after he was shot, Courtney had left him and run away. "Did you come here to take revenge on me?" Courtney lowered her head and asked with sign language. "I came to collect my debt." "Courtney." Hayden's voice was rough. He grabbed Courtney's chin, forcing her to look up the corners of C. Courtney's eyes reddened. She knew that a mischievous guy like Hayden wouldn't let her off so easily. He wouldn't let go of the doctor who had left him behind and run away. Get